coordinates Congress to have it had missed opportunity. That it should not have taken so long to have gotten all of these executives or to get Jeff Bezos there since he has never testified. That they should have become a more regular occurrence, much as it is in the energy phase of the reports and these newer, that companies here much more quickly. So lawmakers sort of were outpaced by the companies that they're supposed to keep watch over. And so I think the hope on the minds of a lot of Democrats is that this is the beginning of a series of things that Congress does to the tech industry, and not just some sort of one-off here.
Tony, in a sign for looks like someone was helping Chairman Cicilline get an iPhone cable plugged in there. So it just goes to show you how this technology is used by everyone, including members of Congress. I'd like to take a moment and thank Tony Rahm, also Jay Green and Jeff Fowler, and earlier Elizabeth Dwoskin and Pat Zuckerberg, journalists at the Washington Post, who have covered this hearing story for many years now. You can continue watching our coverage today. We'll have this live blog up and active. We'll also bring you this hearing uninterrupted throughout wherever you're watching, and I encourage you to subscribe so we can update you as this story evolves. As Tony has reported, this committee is expected to put out a report in the fall, depending on the timeline coronavirus may interfere with that, and then we'll see if Congress is able to act on legislation or move forward. The big question today on many members: are these companies too big? Are they too powerful? And are they stifling competition? The four companies are worth nearly $5 trillion. Chairman Cicilline to gavel in. One last question I have for you, Jeff. These companies are doing great things for the stock market, and we know that the stock market is concerned with people, including President Trump, especially as the nation battles coronavirus. Jeff?
That is true, though their fortunes are tied to how well they're able to sell products. This is supposed to be a really big year for the film industry. They were supposed to all be convinced to upgrade to a later this year, but with the current state keeping so many people at home, who really needs fast internet? You've already got Wi-Fi, and B, with the economy so difficult, who really has to buy a more than $1,000 upgrade to their existing phone? So at some point, this might really, the coronavirus and our current pandemic might these companies' bottom line, and then maybe their view on it might start to change.
This is Washington Post coverage of this hearing. We do expect at any moment. Chairman Cicilline preparing to gavel in. So let's go now live to the hearing room. This is in the U.S. Capitol. I will remind you, CEOs testify remotely over WebEx, but some of these members, including the chairman, are there in person. Others may questions remotely. People encouraged to wear masks and social distance and adhere to the best practices laid forth. We also journalists in the room, but they're also being asked to socially distance, and what a different optical moment, what a different scene than we usually see in these incredibly rooms. And you can see there the panel of some members who are there remotely, it looks like. This hearing was initially scheduled for Monday, but it was delayed until today of the ceremony surrounding the death of Congressman John Lewis. We saw members of Congress honor his legacy in the Capitol Rotunda and so as not to interfere with that and to allow members to participate in that and to honor John Lewis. This was pushed to today. This is the first this has ever testified before Congress. We now bring this hearing to you live.
The subcommittee will come to order. Without objection, the chair is authorized to declare recess time. Welcome everyone to today's hearing on online platforms and market power, part 6, examining the dominance of Amazon, Apple, Facebook, and Google. Before we begin, I'd like to remind members that we have established an email address and distribution list dedicated to circulating exhibits, motions, or other written materials that members might want to our hearing today. If you'd like to submit materials, please send them to the email address that has been previously distributed to your offices, and we will circulate the materials to members and staff as quickly as we can. We'd also remind all members that guidance from the Office of the Attending Physician states that face coverings are required for all meetings in an enclosed space. Hearings, I expect all members on both sides of the aisle to wear a mask except when they are speaking. I now recognize myself for an opening statement. A year ago, this subcommittee launched an investigation into digital markets. Our two objectives have been to document competition problems in the digital economy and to evaluate whether the framework is able to properly address them. In September 2019, the chairman and ranking members of the full committee and the subcommittee issued sweeping bipartisan information to the 4 firms that will testify at today's hearing. Since then, we've received millions of pages of evidence from these firms, as well as documents and submissions from market participants. We also conducted hundreds of hours of interviews. As part of this investigation, we have held 5 hearings to examine the effects of online market power on innovation, ownership, data privacy, free and diverse press, and independent businesses in the online marketplace. We've held 17 briefings and roundtables, 35 experts and stakeholders in support of our work. This investigation has been bipartisan from the start. It's been an honor to work alongside my colleague, Sensenbrenner, the subcommittee's ranking member, as well as the former ranking member of the full committee, Congressman Doug Collins. We work closely with all members of the subcommittee on both sides of the aisle, taking this work seriously and studied these issues carefully. As my colleague, Congressman Ken Buck, recently commented, and I quote, "This is the most bipartisan I've been involved with in 5.5 years of Congress," end quote. The purpose of today's hearing is to examine the dominance of Amazon, Apple, Facebook, and Google. Amazon runs the largest online marketplace in America, capturing 70% of all online marketplace sales. It operates across a vast array of businesses, cloud computing and movie production, transportation, logistics, and small business lending. Amazon's market valuation recently hit $1.5 trillion, more than Walmart, Target, Salesforce, IBM, eBay, and Etsy combined. Apple is a dominant provider of smartphones with more than 100 million iPhones in the United States alone. In addition to hardware, Apple sells services and apps including financial services, media, and games. Facebook is the world's largest provider of services with a business model that sells digital ads. Despite a litany of privacy scandals and record-breaking fines, Facebook continues to enjoy booming $18 billion last year alone. Lastly, Google is the world's largest online search engine, capturing more than 90% of searches online. It controls technologies and digital ad markets and enjoys more than 1 billion users across 6 products, including browsers, smartphones, and digital apps. Prior to the pandemic, these corporations already stood out as titans in our economy. In the wake of COVID-19, however, they're likely to emerge stronger and more powerful than ever before. American families shift more of their work, shopping, and communication online. These giants stand to profit. Locally owned businesses, meanwhile, mom and pop stores on Main Street, economic crisis unlike any in recent history. As hard it is to believe, it's possible that our economy will emerge from this crisis even more concentrated than before. These companies serve as critical arteries of commerce and communications. Because these companies are so central to our modern life, business practices and decisions have an outsized effect on our economy and our democracy. Any single action by one of these companies can affect hundreds of millions of profound and lasting ways. Although these 4 corporations differ in important and meaningful ways, we've observed common patterns and competition problems over the course of this investigation. First, each platform is a bottleneck for a key channel of distribution. Whether they control access to information or to a marketplace, these platforms have an ability to exploit this power. They can charge exorbitant fees, impose oppressive contracts, and extract valuable data from the people and businesses. Second, each platform uses its control over digital infrastructure to surveil other companies, their growth, business activity, and whether they might pose a competitive threat. Each platform has used this data to protect its power by either buying, copying, or cutting off access for any actual or pretended. Third, these platforms abuse their control over current technologies to extend their power, whether it's through self-preferencing, predatory pricing, or to buy additional products. The dominant platforms have wielded their power in destructive, harmful ways in order to expand. At today's hearing, we'll examine how each of these use this playbook to achieve and maintain dominance and how their power shapes and affects our daily lives. So why does this matter? Many of the practices of these companies have harmful economic effects. They discourage entrepreneurship, destroy jobs, hike costs, and degrade quality. Simply put, too much power. This power stades off new forms of competition, creativity, and innovation. And while these dominant firms may still produce some new innovative products, this is killing the small businesses, manufacturing, and overall dynamism that are the engines of the American economy. Several of these firms also harvest and abuse people's data ads for everything from new books to dangerous so-called miracle cures. When everyday Americans learn how much of their data is being mined, they can't run away fast. And in many cases, there's no escape from the surveillance because there's no alternative. People are stuck with bad options. Open markets are predicated on the idea that harms people, consumers, workers, and business partners will choose another option. We're here today because that choice is no longer possible. I'm confident that addressing the problems we see in these markets will lead to a stronger, more vibrant economy. Because concentrated economic power also leads to concentrated political power. It also goes to the heart of whether we, as a people, govern ourselves or whether we let ourselves be governed by private monopolies. American democracy has always been at war against monopoly power. We've recognized that concentrated markets and the American people funded monopolists in the past, be it the railroads or the oil tycoons or AT&T and Microsoft. We took action to ensure no private controls our economy or our democracy. We face similar challenges today. As gatekeepers of the digital economy, these platforms enjoy the power to pick winners, shake down small businesses, and enrich themselves while choking off competitors. Their ability to dictate terms, call the shots, upend entire sectors, our fear represent the powers of a private government. Our founders would not bow before a king, nor would we bow before the emperors of the economy. And with that, I now recognize the ranking member of the subcommittee, Mr. Sensenbrenner, for his opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank the CEOs working with the subcommittee who appear today. The memorial service for John Lewis on Monday required our attention. However, this hearing is vital to us. I have prioritized oversight as one of our seminal responsibilities. Our responsibility is to periodically review the effectiveness of our laws. And I think it's a good and timely thing that we are now turning our attention to technological innovations, which brings us to all of your companies. Our country stricken by a pandemic becomes a dramatic illustration of the extraordinarily Americans have on technological innovations. In these unexpected and unprecedented times, your companies have provided innovation our nations can meet a myriad of our daily needs. The delivery of groceries, virtual visits with doctors, connecting socially distant families, or keeping our small and large businesses connected. That becomes an increased scrutiny of your dominance in the marketplace. I want to say something I've said throughout this investigation. Being big is not inherently bad. Quite the opposite. In America, you're rewarded for success. We are here to better understand the role your companies have in the digital marketplace, and importantly, the effect they have on consumers and the public at large. You lead some of today's more powerful companies, and my colleagues and I have a great interest about what your company do with that accumulated power. We also know that the tech marketplace is driven by data, so it follows that those who in essence control the marketplace. There are broader questions surrounding data. Who owns the data? What responsibilities have to share it with their customers or their competitors? What is the fair market value of that data? Is there anything complex issues that Congress, regulators, and even your own companies are with in the current technological landscape? And the answers to which we owe the American consumers. Since the tech invention began, we've heard rumbling from many who are quick to say your successful companies have grown too large. Since this hearing was announced, it seems that those have gotten even louder. While I find these complaints informative, I don't plan on litigating each of these complaints today. Antitrust law and the consumer welfare standard have served this country well for over a century. Those laws have provided the framework activity to make way for some of our most successful and innovative companies. I will be the first to highlight that. However, as the business evolves, we must ensure that our existing antitrust laws are applied to meet the needs of our country and its consumers. I share the concern that market dominance in the digital space is ripe for abuse, particularly when it comes to free speech. As like Facebook, Google's YouTube, and Twitter have become the public square of today where political debate unfolds in real time. But reports that dissenting views, often conservative views, are targeted or censored is seriously troubling. Our consumers too, and they need the protection of the antitrust laws. The power to influence debate carries with it remarkable abilities. But let the facts be our guide here. Their companies are large. That's not a problem. Their companies are successful. That's not a problem. But I want to leave here today with a more complete picture of how your individual companies use your size, success, and power, and what it means to the consumer. Now you'll back the balance of my time.
Thank the gentleman. Now the chair now recognizes the distinguished chairman of the full committee, the gentleman from New York, for his opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank you, Ranking Member Sensenbrenner, and the subcommittee members for the tremendous that you work with this subcommittee's investigation. I appreciate you calling this hearing today so that we can hear directly from the leaders of Amazon, Apple, Facebook, and Google. I look forward to an important dialogue. Today, it is effectively impossible to use the internet without using, in one way or another, the services of these. I have long believed, with Thomas Jefferson and Louis Brandeis, that concentration of power in any form, especially concentration of economic power, is dangerous to a democratic society. That is why we must examine these and other companies that play a dominant role in our economy and in our society, and ensure that our antitrust laws give enforcers the tools they need to preserve a healthy marketplace. These principles have guided this committee's year-long into competition in digital markets, and they are the lens through which I approach today's hearing. The open internet has delivered enormous benefits to America, including a surge of economic opportunity, massive investment, and new pathways for education online. But there is growing evidence that a handful of corporations capture an outside share of online commerce communication. From providing a dominant search platform, retail platform, and online messaging platform, providing the underlying mapping services and cloud computing on which hundreds of thousands of other businesses rely, these dominant platforms now comprise the essential infrastructure for the 21st century. By virtue of controlling essential infrastructure, these companies have the ability to control access to markets. In some basic, the problem is not unlike what we faced 130 years ago, when railroads transformed American life, both enabling farmers and producers to access new markets, but also creating a key chokehold that the railroad monopolies could exploit. Railroads notoriously abuse this gatekeeper power in a variety of ways. Tolls, extorting the producers reliant on their rails. They discriminated among farmers, picking winners and losers across the economy. And by expanding into lines that competed directly with producers, they could use their dominance in transportation to favor their own services. These tactics by the railroads spurred fear and despair across the country. Congress initiated investigations to document these problems and enacted legislative solutions to halt and outlaw these practices in the railroad industry and other industries dominated by unregulated monopolies and trusts. Importantly, congressional oversight and legislative at this period did not prevent or encumber the inexorable arrival of new technology for human progress. Instead, Congress recognized that these powerful new had reshaped the balance of power in our economy, and that it was the role of Congress to ensure that the new monopolists could not abuse their power. The digital economy poses similar challenges. While the underlying technology is dramatically different, of course, new digital intermediaries have the ability to control access to critical markets. If you are an independent merchant, developer, or content producer, you are increasingly reliant on these powerful intermediaries markets, and consumers. Across the economy, many businesses live in fear of exclusion from these platforms, the fact that some companies have shared with over the past year during this investigation. The subcommittee's current review of competition in the digital marketplace continues a long tradition in this committee of the antitrust laws and our economy. From the days of Chairman Emanuel Seller, the House Judiciary Committee and its antitrust subcommittee have conducted fact-based inquiries into industrial sectors showing signs of consolidation and anti-competitive conduct. This has continued on a bipartisan basis over from Chairman Brooks and Hyde to Chairman Sensenbrenner's and Conyers and others. As a 1950 report from the then-named Subcommittee on Monopoly Power described our mandate, it is the province of this subcommittee to investigate factors which tend to eliminate competition, strengthen monopolies, injure small businesses, undue concentration of economic power, to ascertain the facts and to make recommendations based on those findings. Following in this proud tradition, the commission has held hearings with industry and government witnesses, consultations with subject matter experts, and the careful and at times painstaking review of evidence provided by industry participants and regulators. While ultimately it is the responsibility of the antitrust enforcement agencies to enforce the law, Congress has an obligation to assess whether existing antitrust laws and competition policies and the will to enforce those laws and policies are adequate to address the competition issues facing our country and to take action if they are found to be lacking. Given the dominant role that these four companies play in our economy, it is only reasonable that our careful examination of the antitrust laws begin with them. I appreciate the participation of all today. Our investigation would not be complete. Indeed, it has hardly begun without hearing directly from the decision makers of these companies, the testimony, and to today's discussion. I yield back the balance of my time.
I thank the gentleman, and I now recognize the ranking member of the full.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I also want to thank the ranking member of this subcommittee, Mr. Sensenbrenner. I'm not sure how many more committee hearing work for the constituents of his district in Wisconsin for this many years. He's done for this entire committee.
You'll be sure
I'll just cut to the chase. Big tech's out to get conservative. That's not a suspicion. That's not a hunch. That's a fact. July 20th, 2020, Google removes the home pages of Breitbart and the Daily Caller. Just last night, we learned Google has censored Breitbart so much traffic has declined 99%. June 16th, Google threatens to demonetize and ban the Federalist. April 19th, 2020, Google and YouTube announce a policy censoring the content that conflicts with recommendations of the World Health Organization. Now think about that. The World Health Organization, an organization that lied to us, the organization that shilled for China. And if you contradict something they say, they can say whatever they want. They can lie for China. They can shill for China. You say something against them, you get censored. June 2020, Amazon bans President Trump's account on Twitch after he raises concerns about defunding the police. June 4th, 2020, Amazon bans a book critical of the accounts written by a conservative commentator. May 27th, 2020, Amazon Smile won't let you give to the Family Research Council and the Alliance Defense Fund, but Planned Parenthood. Facebook, June 19th, 2020, takes down post from President Trump's re-election campaign. November 1st, 2018, Facebook's live organizations advertisement. May 19th, 2016, Facebook, former Facebook employees admit Facebook routinely suppresses views. And I haven't even mentioned Twitter. We actually invited, Mr. Chairman, we asked for you guys to invite them as one of. You guys said no. I haven't even mentioned them 2 years ago. They shadow banned 2 members of this committee. 4 members of Congress were shadow banned 2 years ago. In the House, 100 in the Senate, 535. Only 4. Only 4. Gates, Meadows, Nunes, Jordan. Only 4 get shadow banned. And of course, what did Mr. Dorsey tell them? He said, "Oh, it was just a glitch in our algorithm." Just to ask him, what'd you put in the algorithm? The names Gates, Meadows, Nunes, Jordan. Every time I heard it was just a glitch, I wouldn't be as wealthy as our witnesses, but I'd be doing all right. We've heard that excuse time and time again. This is President Trump's tweet on the riots in Minneapolis, May 29, 2020. Twitter censors White House.
the White House for quoting the president's comments about the riots in Minneapolis. June 2020, Twitter censors the president again for saying he'll enforce the rule of law against any autonomous zone in Washington, D.C. You can tweet all you want about the autonomous zone that happened, but the president tweets that he's not going to have one in Washington, D.C. No, can't do that. You get banned, you get censored. Dozens of examples. I forgot one. Just last week, July 21st. July 21st, here's what Twitter did. The leader of Iran, the Islamic Republic of Iran, this is the largest state sponsor of terrorism. Twitter allows this tweet, quote, the Islamic Republic of Iran will never forget the martyrdom of Soleimani and will definitely strike a reciprocal blow in the United States. So you can threaten the citizens of this great country, the leader of the largest state, that's just fine. But the president says he's not going to allow some autonomous zone in DC and he gets censored. Kinds of examples. Most of them from this year, and that's what's I think critical for us all to understand. Most of them from this year. And that's what concerns me and so many Americans, because we saw what Google did in 2016. Wow. We all know about the day after the election, where top executives at Google email chain where they talked about the silent donation Google made to the Clinton campaign. Thank goodness it wasn't enough, and in spite of their efforts to help Clinton, President Trump won. But we're 97 days before an election. As the previous chairman and ranking member have said, the power these companies have to impact what happens during what American citizens get to see prior to their voting is pretty darn important. That's why this committee hearing is important. Look, we think the free market's great. We think competition is great. We love the fact that these are American companies. But what's not great is censoring people, censoring conservatives, and trying to impact elections. And if there has to be consequences. There have to be consequences. That's what I'm concerned about, and I think what so many Americans are concerned about. So I look forward to hearing from our witnesses. Before I yield back, Mr. Chairman, we have a colleague. I would ask unanimous consent that Mr. Johnson, the ranking member of the Constitution Subcommittee, be allowed to participate in today's hearing, which is our customary practice for subcommittee hearings.
The gentleman makes a unanimous consent request.
Mr. Chairman, I would object.
Object. And now have the pleasure of introducing today's
why are we not allowing? It is customary.
Jordan, there was a unanimous consent request. Object. And now we'll introduce our witnesses.
This has never happened.
It is now my pleasure to introduce today's witnesses. Our first witness is Jeff Bezos, the Chief Executive Officer. Jordan, I have the time.
But this is the ranking.
Our first witness.
We're talking about people's liberties here. We have the ranking.
Jordan, you made a unanimous consent request. Objection was heard.
Objection was.
It is now my pleasure to introduce today's witness. Our first witness is Jeff Bezos, the Chief Executive Officer of Amazon.com. Mr. Amazon in I'm going to remind members of this committee, unless you are speaking, our rules require you to wear a mask according to the position. No, I'm speaking about another member of this committee. I'll begin again. It is now my pleasure to introduce today's witnesses. Our first witness is Jeff, Chief Executive Officer of Amazon.com. Mr. Bezos founded Amazon in 1994 as an online bookstore. Since then, Amazon has grown to be the largest online on the internet. Mr. Bezos has also oversees his company's expansion into areas including cloud computing, digital streaming, and artificial intelligence. Mr. Bezos is a Bachelor of Science from Princeton University. The second witness, Sundar Pichai, is the Chief Executive Officer of both Alphabet and its subsidiary Google. Mr. Pichai, 2004, and has helped manage a number of successful products, including Google Chrome, Gmail, and the Android operating system. Mr. Pichai also oversaw the company's products. Prior to his time at Google, Mr. Pichai worked in management consulting at McKinsey. Mr. Pichai received a degree in metallurgical engineering from the Indian Institute of Technology, a master's degree from Stanford University, and an MBA from the Wharton School of the University of Pennsylvania. Our third witness is Tim Cook, the Chief Executive Officer of Apple. He joined Apple in 1998 and served as its Chief Operational Officer until under Steve Jobs. In 2011, Mr. Cook was named CEO. While at Apple, their expansion into new markets, through the launch and developments of products and services like Apple Pay, Apple Watch, iCloud, Apple Card, and HomePod. Prior to joining Apple, the Director of North American Fulfillment for IBM. Mr. Cook received a Bachelor of Science from Auburn University and an MBA from Duke University's UPS School of Business. Witness at today's hearing is Mark Zuckerberg, founder, chairman, and CEO of Facebook. Mr. Zuckerberg initially launched Facebook in order to help connect college students at his school more easily. Since then, the company has grown into the world's largest social media platform with 1.7 billion global daily active users. Mr. Zuckerberg attended Harvard University, to focus full-time on developing Facebook. We welcome all of our distinguished witnesses and thank them for participating in today's hearing. And I will begin by swearing in. And before I do that, I want to also remind you that you are the only ones from your respective companies invited to testify today. Then House practice and Section G of the House Remote Committee proceeding regulations, your sworn testimony must be your own. Please let me know if at any point in the hearing you wish to so you can confer with your counsel. So will you please unmute your microphones and raise your right hands. You affirm under penalty of perjury that the testimony you are about to give is true and correct to the best of your knowledge, information, and belief, so help you God.
Yes.
Let the record show the witnesses answered in the affirmative. Thank you, and you may remain seated. Please note that your written statements will be entered into the record in their entirety. Accordingly, I ask that you summarize your testimony in 5 minutes. To help you stay within that time, there is a timing light in WebEx. When the light switches from green to yellow, you have 1 minute for your testimony. When the light turns red, it signals your 5 minutes have expired. Mr. Bezos, you may begin.
Thank you, Chairman Cicilline, Member Sensenbrenner, and members of the subcommittee. I was born into great wealth, not monetary wealth, but a family, a family that fostered my curiosity and encouraged me to dream big. My mom, Jackie, had me when she was a 17 student in Albuquerque. Being pregnant in high school was not popular. The school tried to kick her out, but she was allowed to finish after my grand negotiated terms with the principal. She couldn't have a locker, no extracurriculars, and couldn't walk across the stage to get her diploma. She grew and was determined to continue her education, so she enrolled in night school, bringing me, her infant son, to class with her throughout. My dad's name, he adopted me when I was 4. He was 16 when he came to the U.S. from Cuba by himself shortly after Castro took over. My dad, and he did not have an easy path. What he did have was grit and determination. He received a scholarship. Resourceful and loving people made me who I am. I walked away from a study that might not work. It feels like just yesterday I was driving the packages to myself, dreaming that one day we might afford a forklift. Customer obsession has driven our success, and I take it as an art that customers notice when you do the right thing. You earn trust slowly over time by doing hard things well. Offering everyday low prices, making promises and keeping them, and making principled decisions, even when they are unpopular. Approach is working. 80% of Americans have a favorable impression of Amazon overall. Who do Americans trust more than Amazon to do the work? Only their doctors and the military. The retail market we participate in is extraordinarily large and competitive. Amazon less than 1% of the $25 trillion global retail market and less than 4% of US retail. There's room in retail for multiple winners. Compete against large established players like Target, Costco, Kroger, and of course, Walmart, a company more than twice Amazon's size. 20 years ago, we made the decision to invite other sellers to sell in our store to share the same valuable real estate we spent billions to build, market, and maintain. We believe that combining the strengths of Amazon's store with the vast selection of products offered by third parties would be a better experience for customers. The growing pie of revenue and profits would be big enough for all. We were betting that it was not a zero-sum game. Fortunately, There are now 1.7 million small and medium-sized businesses selling on Amazon. The trust customers put in us every day has allowed Amazon more jobs in the United States over the past decade than any other company. Hundreds of thousands of jobs across 42 states. Amazon employs $15 an hour, more than double the federal minimum wage. And we offer the best benefits that include comprehensive health insurance, retirement, and parental leave, which includes 20 weeks of paid maternity leave. More than any place on earth, entrepreneurial companies start, grow here in the US. We nurture entrepreneurs and startups with stable rule of law, the finest university system in the world, the freedom of democracy, and a deeply accepted culture of risk-taking. Of course, this great nation of ours is far from perfect. Even as we remember Carlos and honor his legacy, we're in the middle of a much-needed race reckoning. We also face the challenges of climate change and income inequality, stumbling through the crisis of a global pandemic. Still, with all of our faults and problems, the rest of the world would love even the sip of the elixir we have here in the US. Immigrants like my dad see what a treasure this country is. They have perspective, and often more clearly than those of us who were lucky enough to be born here. It is still day one for this country, and even in the face of today's humbling challenges, I've never been more optimistic about our future. I appreciate the opportunity to appear before you today, and I'm very happy to take your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Bezos. Chai, you are now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Sensenbrenner, and members of the subcommittee. Before I start, I know this hearing was delayed because of the ceremonies to honor the life of your colleague, Representative John Lewis. Courage, this world is a better place. It will be deeply missed. At its heart, a discussion about competition is a discussion of opportunity. This has never been more important as the global pandemic poses dual challenges to our health and our economy. Access to opportunity through technology is personal to me. I didn't have much access to a computer growing up in India, so you can imagine my amazement. I arrived in the US for graduate school and saw an entire lab of computers to use whenever I wanted. Accessing the internet for the first time set me on a path of technology to as many people as possible. It inspired me to build Google's first browser, Chrome. I'm proud that 11 years later, many people experience the web through Chrome for free. Google takes pride in the number of people who choose our products. We are even prouder of what from the 140 million students and teachers using G Suite for education to stay connected during the pandemic, to the 5 million digital skills through Grow with Google, to all the people who turn to Google for help, from finding the fastest route home to learning how to cook on YouTube. Google's work would not be possible without the long tradition of American innovation, and we are proud to contribute to its future. More than 75,000 people in the US across 26 states. The Progressive Policy Institute estimated that in 2018, they invested more than $20 billion in the US, citing us as the largest capital investor in America that year, and one of the top 5 for the last 3 years. One is by building helpful products. Research found that free services like search, Gmail, Maps, and Photos provide thousands of dollars a year in traveling in America. And many small businesses using our digital tools to grow. Stone Dimensions, a family-owned stone company in Peoria, uses Google My Business. Hills Appliances, a family-owned appliance store in Bristol, Rhode Island, credit nearly 1/3 of small business owners say that without digital tools, they would have had all contribute is by being among the world's biggest investors in research and development. In 2019, our R&D spend had increased tenfold over 10 years, from $2.8 billion to $26 billion, and we have invested $90 billion the last 5 years. Our engineers are helping America remain a global leader in emerging technologies like artificial self-driving cars and quantum computing. Just as America's technology leadership is not inevitable, Google's continued success is not guaranteed. New competitors emerge every day, and today users have more access to information than ever before. Competition drives us to innovate, and it also leads to better products, lower choices, and more choices for everyone. For example, competition helped lower online advertising costs by 40% over, with savings passed on to consumers. Open platforms like Android also support the innovation of others. Using Android, operators build and sell their own devices without paying any licensing fees to us. This has enabled billions of consumers to afford cutting-edge smartphones, some for less than $50. Whether building tools for small businesses or platforms like Android, Google succeeds when others succeed. Competition also sets higher standards for privacy and security. I've always believed that privacy is a universal right, and Google is committed to keeping it safe, treating it responsibly, putting you in control, and we've long supported the creation of comprehensive federal privacy laws. And how access to technology and innovation changed the course of my life. Google aims to build products that increase access to opportunity for everyone. You live, what you believe, or how much money you earn. We are committed to doing this responsibly in partnership with lawmakers. They ensure everyone has access to the incredible opportunity technology creates. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pichai. Mr. Cook is now ready. 5 minutes.
Chairman Cicilline and Nadler, Ranking Members Sensenbrenner and Jordan, members of the subcommittee, the opportunity to offer testimony. Before I begin, I want to recognize the life and legacy of John Lewis. I join you, not only a hero, but someone I knew personally, whose example inspires and guides me still. Every American owes John Lewis, and I feel fortunate to hail from a state and a country that benefited so profoundly from his leadership. My name is Tim Cook, CEO since 2011 and a proud employee of this uniquely American company since 1998. At Apple, we make ourselves a promise and our customers a promise. It's a promise that we'll only build things that make us proud. And Steve only make things that we recommend to our family and friends. You can try to define this difference in a lot of ways. You can call it the seamless integration of software. You can call it simplicity of design or a great ecosystem. All of those things are true. But if you want to put it simply, iPhone just work. When customers consistently give iPhone a 99% satisfaction rating, that's the message they're sending about experience. But we also know that customers have a lot of choices and that our products face fierce competition. Companies like Samsung, Huawei, and Google have built successful businesses with different approaches. We're okay with that. Our goal is the best, not the most. If we don't have a dominant share in any market or in any product category where we do business. What does motivate us is that time to build new things that we're proud to show our users. We focus relentlessly on those innovations, on deepening core principles like privacy, and on creating new features. In 2008, we introduced a new feature of the iPhone called the App Store. Launched with 500, which seemed like a lot at the time, the App Store provided a safe and trusted way for users to get more out of their phone. We knew the distributions for software developers at the time didn't work well. Brick and mortar stores charged high fees and had limited reach. Physical media like CDs had to be hard to update. From the beginning, the App Store was a revolutionary alternative. App Store developers set prices for their apps, paid for shelf space. We provide every developer with cutting-edge tools like compilers, programming languages, and more than 150 central software building blocks called APIs. The App Store guidelines ensure a high quality, reliable, and secure user experience, transparent, and applied equally to every developer. For the vast majority of apps, developers keep 100% of the money they make. The only apps that are subject to a commission are those where the developer acquires a customer on an Apple device and where the features or services were used and consumed on an Apple device. In the App Store's more than 10-year history, we have never raised the commission or added a single fee. In fact, we've reduced it for subscriptions and exempted additional categories of apps. I'm here today because scrutiny is reasonable and appropriate. Approach this process with respect and humility, but we make no concession on the facts. What began as 500 apps is now more than 1 million, only 60 of which are Apple software. If Apple is a gatekeeper, what we've done is open the gate wider. We want to get what we can on the store, not keep them off. The App Store's economic contributions are significant. The ecosystem is responsible for 1.2 jobs in all 50 states, and it facilitated $138 billion in commerce in the US in 2019 alone. I share the community that competition promotes innovation, that it makes space for the next great idea, and that it gives consumers more choices. Since Apple was founded, things have defined us. The first Mac brought opportunity and possibility into the home. The iPod helped musicians and artists to share their creativity, paid fairly for it. This legacy does much more than make us proud. It inspires us to work tirelessly to make sure tomorrow will be even than today. Thank you very much. I look forward to responding to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Cook. Mr. Zuckerberg is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Before I begin, I want to add my voice to those honoring Congressman John Lewis and his service to our country. America has a hero who never stopped fighting for the rights of every person. Chairman Cicilline, Ranking Member Sensenbrenner, members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to testify. The tech industry is an American success story. The products we build have changed the world and improved people's lives. Industry is one of the ways that America shares its values with the world and one of our greatest economic and cultural exploits. Facebook is part of this story. It started with an idea to give people the power to share and connect. And we've built services that billions of people find useful. I'm proud that people who've never had a voice before the opportunity to be heard, and given small businesses access to tools that only the largest players used to have. It emerged. I'm proud that people have used our services to stay in touch with friends and family who they can't be with in person, and to keep their small businesses running when physical stores are closed. I believe that Facebook and the US tech industry are a force for innovation and empowering people, but I recognize concerns about the size and power of tech companies. Our services are about connection, and our business model is advertising, and we face intense competition. Many of our competitors have hundreds of millions or billions of users. Some are upstarts, but others are gatekeepers with the power to decide if we can even in their app stores to compete with them. In many areas, we're behind our competitors. The most popular messaging service in the US is iMessage. The fastest growing app is TikTok. The most popular app for video is YouTube. The fastest growing ads platform is Amazon. The ads platform is Google. And for every dollar spent on advertising in the US, less than 10 cents is spent with us. I'm here to talk about online platforms, but I think the true nature of competition is much broader. When Google bought YouTube, they could compete against the dominant player in Kroger's and Walmart. When Facebook bought WhatsApp, we could compete against telcos who used to charge 10 cents a text anymore. Now people can watch video, get groceries delivered, and send private messages for free. That's competition. New companies all the time, all over the world. And history shows that if we don't keep innovating, someone will replace every company here today. And that change can often happen fast. Of the 10 most valuable companies a decade ago, only 3 still make that list today. And if you look at where the top tech companies come from, a decade ago, the vast majority were American. Today, almost half are Chinese. Aside from competition, there are others related to the internet, including questions about elections, harmful content, and privacy. And while these are not antitrust issues and are not specifically this hearing, I recognize that we are often at the center of these discussions. We build platforms for sharing ideas, and important debates play out across our services. I believe that this ultimately leads to more progress, but it means we often find ourselves in the middle of deep disagreements about social issues and high-stakes elections. I personally don't believe that private companies should be making so many decisions about these issues by themselves. And that's why last year, I made the case that there needs to be new regulations on the internet. Facebook stands for a set of basic principles: giving people voice and economic opportunity, keeping people safe, traditions like freedom of expression and voting, and enabling an open and competitive marketplace. These are fundamental values for most of us, but not for every company we compete with or the countries they represent. And as global competition increases, there's no guarantee that our values will win out. I'm proud of the services we build and how they improve people's lives. We compete hard. We compete fairly. We try to be the best. That's what I was taught matters in this country. When we succeed, it's because we deliver great experiences that people love. Thank you, and I look forward to questions.
Thank you, and I thank the witnesses for your opening statements. Before I begin recognizing members for questioning under the 5-minute rule, without objection, I'm going to documents and exhibits majority members will be referencing in their questioning today. These materials have been distributed to the witnesses. I will now recognize myself. Mr. Bachai, over 85% of all online searches go through Google. Every online company in the United States depends on Google to reach users. The business may sink or swim based on Google's decisions alone. Numerous online businesses told us that Google steals their content and privileges its own sites, and Google would crush everyone else. Most businesses asked to stay anonymous due to fears that Google would retaliate against them. One entrepreneur, Brian Warner, told us his website was thriving and stole his content. After Google's decision, traffic to his website dropped by 80%, he had to downsize his business and lay off half his staff. He told us, and I quote, "With an idea for a website or a web service today, I tell them to run as far away from the web as possible. Launch a lawn care business or a dog grooming business, something to take away as soon as he or she is thriving." So my first question, Mr. Bachai, is why does Google steal content from honest businesses?
Mr. Chairman, with respect, I disagree with that characterization. Just last week, I met with businesses. In fact, today we support 1.4 million small businesses, supporting over $385 billion in economic activity. Many businesses thrive, particularly even during the pandemic. Businesses, an example, Kettle Kings in Texas, which sells kettlebells.
Listen, I have a limited amount of time, so I don't want to interrupt you, but my question is very specific. We've heard throughout this investigation that Google has stolen content to build business. These are consistent reports, and so your testimony that doesn't happen is really inconsistent with what we've learned during the course of the investigation. But I'm to a new question. Mr. Bachai, most Americans believe that when they enter a search query that what Google shows are the most relevant results. But increasingly, Google just most profitable for Google, be it Google Ads or Google's own sites. So my question, Mr. Bachai, isn't there a fundamental conflict of interest between serving access to the best and most relevant information and Google's business model, which incentivizes Google to sell ads and keep users on Google's own sites?
We've always focused on providing users the most relevant information, and we rely on that trust for users to come back to Google every day. In fact, the vast majority of queries in Google, we don't show ads at all. We show ads only for a small subset of queries. And from users is highly commercial. For example, they may be looking for something like TV sets or so on.
But Mr. Richard,
So-
what is the value of the part that you do use that for? I mean, it's a substantial part of your business. What's the actual value? 200 billion, 300 billion?
In terms of revenue, $100 plus billion, but
That's a
we
lot of
have-
money, Mr. Pichai. Let me move on. Really, Mr. Pichai, it's Google's business problem. Our documents show that Google evolved from a turnstile to the rest of the web to a walled garden that increasingly keeps users within its sites. Even a decade ago, Google started to fear competition from certain websites, web pages that could divert search traffic and revenue from Google. These documents show that Google staffed a proliferating threat, is how it was described, that these web pages pose to Google. Any traffic lost to other sites was a loss in revenue. One of Google's memos observed websites were getting, and I quote, too much traffic. So Google decided to put an end to that. Mr. Pichai, you've been at Google since 2004. Were you involved in these discussions threat from vertical search?
Congressman, without knowing the specifics, it's not fully clear of the context. Definitely, when we look at vertical searches, it validates the competition we see. For example, when users come looking to shop online, independent studies, 55% of product searches originate with Amazon, and over 70% originate with the major e-commerce companies. In the few categories which are commercial in nature, the vigorous competition, the travel, the real estate, and we are working hard.
Well, let me ask very specifically, Mr.
to innovate
Pichai.
there.
The evidence that Google pursued a multi-pronged attack. First, Google began to steal other web pages' content. For example, in 2010, Google stole restaurant reviews from Yelp to rival local search business. Mr. Pichai, do you know how Google responded when Yelp asked you to stop stealing their reviews? Well, I'll tell you, our investigation shows that Google's response was to threaten to delist Yelp entirely. In other words, the choice Google gave Yelp was, let us steal your content and disappear from the web. Mr. Pichai, isn't that anti-competitive?
Congressman, when I run the company, really focused on giving users what they want. We conduct ourselves to the highest standard. Happy to engage, understand the specifics, and answer your questions further.
Thank you. Series of questions, Mr. Pichai. Did Google ever use its surveillance over web traffic to identify competitive threats?
And just like other businesses, we try to understand trends from data which we can see, and we use it to improve our products for our. But we really focused on improving our products, and that's how.
I appreciate that, Mr. Pichai. Google's own documents and numerous interviews with companies affected by this conduct Google did just that, which is very disturbing and very anti-competitive. In addition to stealing content, Google also began to privilege its own sites. An investigation just yesterday found that 63% of web searches that start on Google also end somewhere on Google's own websites. And to me, that's evidence that Google is a walled garden, which keeps users on Google sites, even if Google doesn't have the most relevant information, and it's economically catastrophic for other companies online. And so, but Mr. Pichai, I'll just end by saying the evidence seems very clear to me. As Google became the gateway to the internet, it began to abuse its power. It used its surveillance over web to identify competitive threats and crush them. It has dampened innovation and business growth, and it's dramatically increased the price of accessing users on the internet, virtually ensuring that wants to be found on the web must pay Google a tax. And with that, I recognize the ranking member of the subcommittee, Mr. Sensenbrenner, for his first round.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I've been in Congress 42 years. That's coming to an end at the end of this year. I'm breathing a sigh of relief. But during that period, decade of the 90s and the 00s, I was involved as chairman of the Science Committee and chairman of this committee, and trying to make the universal, and open it up to everybody. And one of the theses that we used could end up becoming basically a debate on issues not only in our country but throughout the world. And in exchange for that, this committee and the Congress gave internet service providers immunity. So if somebody said something to, and what they posted, the ISPs could not be a part of a lawsuit for defamation. Now, after hearing Mr. Jordan give a long line of censorship of conservative viewpoints, I'm concerned that the people who manage the net, and the four of you manage a big part of the net, are ending this as a political screen. Conservatives are consumers too. And the way the net was put together as of Congress is that everybody should be able to speak their mind. Mr. Zuckerberg, Mr. Jordan's litany of shit zeroes in on Facebook. Exactly what are your standards in, quote, filtering out political speech some people out there don't agree with?
Congressman, thank you for the opportunity to address this. Our goal is to offer a platform for all ideas. We want to give everyone in the world a voice to share their experiences, and a lot of that is day-to-day things that happen in their lives. Some of it is political. And frankly, I think that we've distinguished ourselves as one of the companies defends free expression the most. We do have community standards around things that you can and cannot say. I think I agree with most of them. They ban categories of harm such as promoting terrorist propaganda, child exploitation, incitement of some more legalistic things like intellectual property violations, and they also ban things like hate speech. Could lead to dehumanizing people and encouraging violence down the road.
If I may ask a specific of you, it was reported that Donald Trump was taken down for a period of time because he put something up on the efficacy of hydroxychloroquine. Now, I wouldn't take it myself, but there still is a debate on whether it is effective either in treating or preventing COVID-19. And I think that this is a legitimate matter of discussion. And it would be up to a patient and their doctor to determine whether hydroxychloroquine was the correct medication, given the circumstances. Why did that happen?
Congressman, to be clear, I think what you might be referring to happened on Twitter, so it's hard for me to speak to that, but I can talk to our policies about this. We do prohibit content imminent risk of harm, and stating that there's a proven cure for COVID when there is in fact none might encourage someone to go take something that has effect. So we do take that down. We do not prohibit discussion around trials of drugs or people saying that things might work or personal experiences with experimental drugs. But if someone is going to say that something is proven when in fact it is not, that could lead.
Wouldn't that be up for somebody on the other side of the issue to say that this is not proven? And, I know as a fact that, for conditions, it's contraindicated and they shouldn't take it on that. But wouldn't that be up to somebody else, to say, okay, what he posted on this really isn't true, and here's what the facts are, rather than having a Twitter or a Facebook take it?
Congressman, in general, I agree with you, and we do not want to become the arbiters of truth. Be a bad position for us to be in, and not what we should be doing. But on specific claims, if someone is going to go out and say that hydroxychloroquine is proven to cure COVID, when in fact it has not been proven to cure COVID, and that statement people to take a drug that in some cases, some of the data suggests that it might be harmful to people, we think that we should take that down.
Thank you, I yield back. I thank the gentleman. I now recognize the distinguished chair of the full Judiciary Committee, Mr. Nadler from New York.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Zuckerberg, I want to thank you for providing this information during our investigation. However, the documents you provide a very disturbing story. And that story is that Facebook saw Instagram as a powerful threat that could siphon business away from Facebook. And so rather than with it, Facebook bought it. This is exactly the type of anti-competitive acquisition that the antitrust laws were designed to prevent. Now let me explain what I mean. Mr. Zuckerberg, you have written that Facebook can likely always just buy any competitive startups. In fact, on the day Facebook bought Instagram, which you described as a threat, you wrote, quote, "One thing about startups is you can often acquire them," close quote. Mr. Zuckerberg, you were referring to companies like Instagram and that.
Congressman, I don't have the exact document in front of me, but I've always been clear that we viewed Instagram both as a complement to our services. In the growing space around after smartphones started getting big, and they competed with us in the cameras and mobile photo sharing, but at the time, almost no one thought of them as a general social network, and people didn't think of them as competing with us in that space. And I think that the acquisition has been wildly successful. We were able to by acquiring them, continue investing in it as a standalone brand that now reaches many more people than I think either Kevin, the co-founder, or I thought would be possible at the time. Bringing some of the technology into making Facebook's photos sharing products better. So yes.
Okay. 2012, when Facebook contemplated acquiring Instagram, a competitive startup, you told your CFO that though nascent, Instagram could be to us. And in the weeks leading up to the deal, you described Instagram as a threat, saying that, quote, "Instagram can meaningfully hurt us without becoming a huge business," unquote. Now, Mr. Zuckerberg, what did you mean when you described Instagram as a threat, as disruptive? And when you said that Instagram could hurt Facebook, did you mean that consumers might switch from Facebook to Instagram?
Congressman, thanks for the opportunity to. At the time, there was a small but growing field of.
Did you mean that consumers might switch from Facebook to Instagram? That was my question.
Thanks, Congressman.
Yes or no? Did you mean that?
In the space of mobile photos and camera apps, which was growing, I've been concerned about that. And
fine. In February of that year, in February 2012, you told Facebook's chief financial officer in buying Instagram. He asked you whether the purpose of the deal was to neutralize a potential competitor or to integrate their products with ours in order to improve our services. You answered a combination of both, saying what we're really buying is time. Even if some new competitors springs up, those products won't get much traction since mechanics deployed at scale. Mr. Zuckerberg, what did you mean when you answered that the purpose of the deal was to neutralize a potential competitor?
Well, those aren't my words, but yes, I've been clear that Instagram was a competitor in the space of mobile photo sharing. There were a lot of other competed with apps like IscoCam and Pick Please and companies like Path. It was a subset of the overall space of connecting that we exist in. And by having them join us, they certainly went from being a competitor in the space of mobile camera to an app that we could help grow and help get more people to be able to use and be on our team. And I think that's been wildly.
Well, Mr. Zuckerberg, mergers and acquisitions that buy off potential competitive threats violate the antitrust laws. You purchased Instagram to neutralize a competitive threat. If this was an illegal merger at the time of the transaction, why shouldn't Instagram now be broken by every company?
Well, Congressman, I think the FTC had all of these documents and reviewed this and unanimously voted on the acquisition. I mean, I think with hindsight, it probably looks like obvious that Instagram would have reached the scale that it has today, but at the time, obvious. A lot of the competitors that they competed with in mobile sharing, including companies like Path, which were hot at the time and had Great founders running them, Dave Moore, and I work closely with him. I mean, I don't even think Path exists today. It was not a guarantee that Instagram was going to succeed. The acquisition has done well, largely because not just of the founders' talent, but because we invested heavily in building up the infrastructure and promoting it and security and working on a lot of things around this. And I think that this has been an American success story.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Mr. Zuckerberg, you're making my point. Mr. Chairman, I want to end where I began. Facebook, by Mr. Zuckerberg's own admission and by the documents we have from the time, Facebook saw Instagram as a threat to potentially siphon business away from Facebook. And so rather than compete with it, Facebook bought it. This is exactly the type of anti-competitive acquisition that the anti designed to prevent. This should never have happened in the first place. It should never have been permitted to happen, and it cannot happen again. I yield back.
Well, again, Mr. Chairman, I would remind the witness that the failures of the FTC in 2012, of course, do not alleviate the antitrust challenges that the chairman described. And I'm going to recognize the gentleman from Colorado, and again, thank him for co-hosting one of the most important field hearings we had along with Mr. Neguse in Colorado. And I think
to you for the bipartisan way that you have approached the subcommittee's investigation. By saying that capitalism is the greatest instrument for freedom this world has ever seen. Capitalism has given the United States the freedom and means to defeat the Soviet Union, fascism, and put a man on the moon. This economic system has lifted millions out of poverty. It has made America the freest, most prosperous nation. Our witnesses have taken ideas born out of a dorm room, a garage, a warehouse, and built these dreams into four of the biggest power players in the digital global. You have all enjoyed the freedom to succeed. Now, let me be clear. I do not believe big is necessarily bad. In fact, big is often a force. However, I want to address one particularly disturbing issue. Mr. Pichai, in October 2018, Google dropped out of the running for a Pentagon contract, the Joint Enterprise Defense Infrastructure, or JEDI contract, which was valued at more than $10 billion. Google's stated reason for removing itself from the process is that the U.S. military's project did not align with Google's corporate values and principles. This is the same U.S. military for our freedoms and stands as a force for good across the globe. These are the same soldiers, sailors, and airmen that sacrifice their lives to ensure you have the freedom to build your company and set your corporate policies without fear of government interference, unlike in communist China. I also think that only months after making this decision to withdraw from the JEDI contract, Marine General Joseph Dunford, the chairman of the U.S. Joint Chiefs of Staff, warned the Senate Committee that the Chinese military was directly benefiting from Google's work. It made me wonder what values Google and China had in common. I asked myself, is it that the Chinese Communist Party imprisons Uyghur Muslims in concentration camps? Like on the chart behind me, could it be that China forces slaves to work in sweatshops? Maybe they align on suppress free speech in Hong Kong. Did Google agree with CCP's decision to lie to the world about the COVID-19 pandemic? Then I thought about Google's spy experiment. I wondered if perhaps you agreed with the Chinese government's use of technology platforms to spy on its own people and enforce draconian security laws. Maybe it's that your company is aligned with the Chinese Communist Party's corporate espionage policies, where the strategy is to steal whatever can't be produced. These values that allow Google to work with the Chinese military but not the U.S. military help explain why Google wouldn't think twice about blatantly stealing a competitor's down to the watermark without any hint of attribution. Mr. Pichai, during our field hearing in my home state of Colorado, I heard a story that sounded so brazen and market principles that I thought it must have been straight from the Chinese Communist Party's corporate espionage playbook. Google took advantage of a company that relied on engine to build its brand and compete. Google misappropriated lyrics from Genius Media Group's website and published those lyrics on Google's own platform. However, Genius caught Google in the act, quite literally red-handed. When Genius suspected this corporate theft was occurring, the company incorporated a digital watermark that spelled out red-handed. In Morse code, Google's lyric boxes contained the watermark, showing that your company stole what you couldn't or didn't yourself. After Google executives stated that they were investigating this problematic behavior, Genius created another experiment to determine the scope of the misappropriation. Turns out that out of 271 songs where the watermark was applied, 43% showed clear evidence of matching. Your company, which advertised as a doorway to freedom, took advantage of this small company, all but extinguishing Genius's freedom to compete. Google is supposed to connect people to information. Corporate values once stood for freedom, a platform that let capitalism flourish and helped bring countless people across the globe out of poverty. Mr. Pichai, do you think that Google could get away with following China's corporate espionage playbook if you didn't have a monopolistic advantage in the
Congressman, I want to be able to address the important concerns you raised. First of all, we're proud to support the U.S. government. We recently signed a big project with the Department of Defense where we're bringing our world-class, zero-trust-based cybersecurity approach to help protect from cybersecurity attacks. We have projects underway with the Navy, the Department of Veterans Affairs. Happy to follow up and explain more. We have a presence in China. We don't offer any of our services, search, maps, Gmail, YouTube, etc. in China. And with respect to music, we compare with, in fact, we license content from other companies. And so this is a dispute between Genius and the other company in terms of where the source of the content is. I'm happy to engage and explain what we do here.
Okay, yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank the gentleman. I now recognize the gentleman from Johnson for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Cook, with over 100 million iPhone users in the United States alone, and with Apple's ownership of the app, giving Apple the ability to control which apps are allowed to be marketed to Apple users, you wield immense power over small businesses to grow and prosper. Apple is the sole decision maker as to whether an app is made available to app users through Apple's app. Isn't that correct?
Sir, the App Store, thank you for the questions. The App Store is a feature of the iPhone. Camera is and the chip is. And so
my point is, and I'm sorry to interrupt, but I want to get to the point. Point is that Apple is the sole decision maker as to whether an app is made available to app users through the Apple Store. Isn't that correct?
If it's a native app, yes. It's a web app.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. And throughout our investigation, we've heard concerns that rules governing the App Store review process are not available to the app developers. The rules are made up as you go. They are arbitrarily interpreted and are subject to change whenever Apple sees fit to change. And developers have no choice but to go along with the changes or leave the App Store. That's an enormous amount of power. Also, the rules get changed to benefit Apple at the expense of developers, and the App Store is said to also discriminate between app developers with similar apps on the Apple platform, also as to small app developers versus large app developers. So, Mr. Cook, does Apple not treat all app developers equally?
Sir, we treat every developer the same. We have open and transparent rules. It's a rigorous process. We care so deeply about privacy and security and quality. We do look at every app before it goes on, but those apps are evenly to everyone. And as you can tell by going from...
Some developers are favored over others, though. Isn't that correct?
Is not correct. And as you can tell from going from...
I'll give you an example. Baidu has two app store employees assigned to help it navigate the App Store bureaucracy. Is that true?
About that, sir.
Well, you don't have other app developers who have that same access to Apple.
We do a lot of things with developers, including looking at their beta test apps, regardless of whether they're small or large.
Well, let me ask you this question. Apple has negotiated exceptions to its typical 30% commission for like Amazon Prime. Is a reduced commission such as the one that Amazon Prime gets available to other developers?
It's available to anyone meeting the conditions, yes.
Okay, well, let me ask you this. Apple requires all apps to use Apple's payment processing system if those developers want to sell their goods or services to Apple users through Apple's. Isn't that correct?
That is correct, because it's
by processing payments for apps that you allow into the app, you collect their customer data and you use that data to inform Apple as to whether Apple should, that it would be profitable for Apple to launch a competing app. Isn't that correct?
Sir, 84% of the apps are charged nothing. Remaining 16% either pay 15 or 30, depending upon the specifics. If it's in the second year of a subscription, it only pays 15%. If you look back at history,
what's to stop Apple from increasing its commission to 50%?
We have never increased commissions in the store since the first day it operated in 2008.
There's nothing to stop you from doing so.
No, sir, I disagree strongly with that. There is a competition for developers just like there's a competition for customers. And so the competition they write their apps for Android or Windows or Xbox or PlayStation. So we have fierce competition at the developer side and the customer side, which is essentially, it's so competitive, I would describe it as a street fight for market share in the smartphone business.
Has Apple ever retaliated against or disadvantaged a developer who went public about their frustrations with?
Sir, we do not retaliate or bully people. It's strongly against our company culture.
Time expired. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Gates.
Mr. Zuckerberg, in his written testimony, made the claim that Facebook is an American company and values. Do any of the rest of you take a different view? That is to say that your companies don't embrace American values. Great to see that. Mr. Pichai, I'm worried about Google's market power, how it concentrates that power, and then ultimately how it wields it. Project Maven was a collaboration between Google and the Department of Defense that Google pulled out, citing ethical concerns, and you made the decision to pull out of that joint venture of a letter from thousands of your employees saying that Google should not be in the business of war. My question, Mr. Pichai, is did you weigh the input from these when making the decision to abandon that project with the United States military?
Congressman, thanks for your concern. As I said earlier, we're deeply supporting the military and the US government. We've undertaken several projects since then. We do take our employees' input into account, but it's one input. Based on a variety of factors. As a company, we were new in the cloud space at that time. Since then,
thank you. That's a sufficient answer. Take their feedback into account. And in fact, some of your Googlers have recently sent you a letter where they've asked you to exit other partnerships as a consequence of that. They've asked you to stop doing business with American law enforcement, saying that police broadly uphold white supremacy. Google should not be engaged in any services to police. And as you well know, you provide some of the most basic services to police, like email, but you also provide services to our cops safe when they're doing their job. And so my question is here in front of Congress and the American people, will you take the pledge that Google will adopt the bigoted anti-police policy that is requested in the most recent letter?
Congressman, we have a long track record of working with law enforcement when it is supported by due process and the law. We push back against overbroad requests. We have transparency we get, but we have a long history of following the law and cooperating with law enforcement.
I understand the history. I'm asking about the future. That are watching today, can they rest assured that under your leadership, Google will not adopt these bigoted anti-police policies?
Congressman, we're continuing to work with law enforcement in a way that's consistent with law and due processes in the U.S.
Well, I greatly appreciate that, and I know that comforting to the police who utilize your services. You mentioned earlier in your discussion about China that your engagement in China was, but yet Google has an AI China Center. The Chinese Academy of Sciences has published a paper saying that enhanced the capabilities of China's J-20 fighter aircraft. You collaborate with Chinese universities that take millions upon millions of dollars from the Chinese military. One of your Googlers, Fifi Li, while under your employ, was cited in Chinese state media saying, China is like a sleeping giant. She will tremble the world. The former Secretary of Defense, Mr. Shanahan, said that the lines have been blurred in China between commercial and communication. And as Mr. Buck cited, General Dunford says that your company is directly aiding the Chinese military. And Peter Thiel, who actually Zuckerberg's board at Facebook, said that Google's activities with China are treasonous. He accused you of treason. So why an American company with American values so directly aid the Chinese military, but have ethical concerns about working with the U.S. military on Project Maven? And I understand your point about cybersecurity and those things, but Project Maven was a specific way to ensure that our troops battlefield. And if you have no problem making the J-20 Chinese fighter more effective in its targeting, why wouldn't you want to make America as effective?
Congressman, with respect, we are not working with the Chinese military. It's absolutely false. I had a chance to meet with General Dunford personally, clarified what we do in China compared to our peers. It's very, very limited in nature. Our AI work in China is limited to a handful of people working on projects. I'm happy to share and engage with your office to explain our work in China first.
Gosh, I mean, when the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, American company, is directly aiding China, when you have an AI center, when you're working with universities, and when your employees are talking about China trembling the world, it seems to be the question of commitment to our country and our values. I see my time's expired. I hope we have an additional round, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, gentleman. I now recognize the gentleman from Maryland. Mr.
Chairman, Mr. Zuckerberg, as you know, the proliferation of fake was a key tool in the strategy of Russian interference in the American election in 2016. American law enforcement, the Senate, have all found that Vladimir Putin engaged in a sweeping and systematic campaign to undermine American democracy and to work for a victory for Donald Trump. In his remarkable book, Mind Blank, and I'm being polite here, came in the plot to break America, whistleblower Christopher Wiley, who worked for several years at Cambridge Analytica, recounts how the Russian assault on America and Cambridge Analytica depended on Facebook. Quote, when Cambridge Analytica launched in the summer of 2014, Steve Bannon's goal was to change politics by changing culture. Data, algorithms, and narratives were his key weapons. The Cambridge Analytica team used these tools to identify people who exhibited the three traits in what they called triad: narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy. They then proceeded to bombard and activate these people, a small percentage of the American public, but people with increasingly dark and manipulative messages from fake Facebook pages, both to get them to vote for Trump, but more importantly, to activate them and white nationalists. And they go on to describe the he goes on to describe the remarkable success of this campaign, both electorally but also politically, in terms of sowing the terrible racial and ethnic divisions that you see in America today. So they waged a mass campaign of psychological warfare to pull America around race and religion and to activate racists and anti-Semites. And it worked splendidly for them, but it didn't work so well for America. Zuckerberg, which parts of this narrative have you addressed, or are you planning to address, or do you just see that essentially as the cost of being a forum place for ideas? Is there nothing that can be done about the use of Facebook to engender social division in America?
Congressman, thank you. Since 2016, there have been a lot of steps that we've taken to protect the integrity of elections. Hired, I think it's more than 30,000 people to work on safety and security. We've built up AI systems to be able to find harmful content, including being able to find more than 50 different networks of coordinated and authentic behavior, basically nation states trying to interfere in elections.
Can I pause you? Let me just pause you there for a second, because I'm interested in that. The Stop Hate for Profit campaign is a coalition that includes the Color of Defamation League and other civil rights groups, and they're targeting Facebook right now for a boycott because of the rapid spread of hate messages online, the president and other right-wing extremist groups trying to infiltrate and disrupt Black Lives Matter protests, and the fact that alt-right, racist, and anti-Semitic content from Facebook. So they're asking you to remove these pages and essentially to join the movement for civil rights by not allowing that kind of content. Their boycotters include a lot of big companies, including Patagonia, Levi's, McDonald's, VW, Heineken, and so on. But you seem not to be that movement campaign, and I just wonder what you think about what they're asking you to do.
Congressman, thanks. We're very focused on fighting against interference, and we're also very focused on fighting against hate speech. And our commitments to those issues and fighting them go back years before this recent move. Since 2016, the defenses that the company has built up to help secure elections, not just in the US, but around the world, I think are some of the most advanced your government has in the world now. We routinely now collaborate with law enforcement and intelligence agencies and are able to sometimes threats coming from other countries before governments are even able to. In terms of fighting hate, we've built really sophisticated. Our goal is to identify it before anyone even sees it on the platform. And we built AI systems, and as I mentioned, have tens of thousands of people working on security with the goal of getting this stuff down so that way before people even see it. And right now, we're able to proactively identify 80% of the hate speech that we take down before I think it's even seen by other people. So, you know, I want to do better than 89%. I'd like to get that to 99%. But we have a massive investment here. We invest billions of dollars.
Because my time's almost out. Can you just address the proliferation of fake accounts? I understand annually you get 6.5 billion fake accounts produced there, but in some sense you have a profit motive that's linked to, because that's what's reported to your investors, the number of accounts. Are you working zealously to try to ferret out these fake accounts that are used to spread information?
Gentleman's time has expired, but the witness may answer the question.
Congressman, absolutely. We work hard on this. We take down billions a year. A lot of that is just people trying to set up accounts to spam people for commercial reasons. A very small percentage of states trying to interfere in elections, but we're very focused on trying to find those. Having fake and harmful content on our platform does not help. It hurts our business. People do not want to see that stuff, and they use our services less when they do. So we are aligned with people in order to take that down, billions of dollars a year in doing so.
Yield back, thank you.
The committee will stand in recess for 10 minutes while we fix a technical feed with one of our witnesses.
a technical feud between Facebook, Google, and Apple employees on their live stream. They have a tech. They are really advanced.
Apple. You would hope that Apple.
$10. So far, it's interesting. I'm interested in hearing what I'm hearing. I have no real, because I use all of the platforms and happily, but I'm not. I'm the peon, remember? They're supposed to be thinking for us, so I'm listening. And the Google dude doesn't seem like he's very honest. Zuckerberg's Amazon catching up right. No one's talking to him with this 13 million. Filling back up.
Maybe we'll come back to order. I now recognize the gentleman from North Dakota, Mr. Armstrong, for 5 minutes. Criticism about bias against conservatives and content moderation. There were threats of demonetizing the Federalist and numerous other complaints of viewpoint suppression. As a result, a significant portion of the American public has lost trust in your company. A lack of public confidence in a product usually means there's economic harm. That just isn't the case with Google. So I think it's a legitimate question as to whether Google's market power insulates it from loss of revenue normally associated with spending half the people who use your product. I also think it's a legitimate question to ask if other attempts to regulate your industries have worked. Mr. Pichai, Google has restricted advertising analytics or the portability of user data related to advertising due to compliance with the General Data Protection Regulation. Specifically, in 2018, Google restricted the ability to export the double ID, a cookie-based identifier that compiles individual user data and creates through Google data transfer. Is that correct?
Congressman, not familiar with the specifics of that particular issue, but happy to follow up more once I understand it better.
So you're not particularly familiar with how you're complying with GDPR?
Congressman, we've long been working to comply with GDPR. We think it's an important regulation, and we are in full compliance knowledge. I just meant not aware of the specific issue with the identifier you mentioned there, but happy to understand it better and follow.
All right. So in order to comply with GDPR, Google must retain control over more user data and restrict the ability to combine this user data with other platforms to conduct cross-platform analysis. Is if that ultimately limits the ability of advertisers to make comparisons between Google-based campaigns and non-Google-based campaigns. Would you agree with that?
In all these ecosystems, we are balancing between users, advertisers, and publishers. We deeply care about the privacy and security. And so when we serve these ecosystems, we have to take that into account. We have to comply with important laws and regulations in every country. So that's the delicate balance we are constantly striking, but we are focused on our users and trying to do the best we can.
And I just want to be perfectly clear. Personally believe that just the market power consolidation is significant, but I also want to be clear that when we're moving forward to regulate this, that we aren't actually competition in our quest to do something. Because I've said that before in this hearing, and I'll say it again. Usually in our quest to regulate big companies, we end up companies more. And I'm a strong privacy advocate, but the consequences of GDPR have been to further entrench large established actors like Google, leading to regulatory that exasperates competition concerns. And Google's digital ad market share has increased since the implementation of GDPR. Do you know that to be?
Congressman, to just give you a sense of the robust competition we see, ad prices have fallen down by 40% in the past 10 years. In the US, advertising as a share of GDP has come down from 1.4% in 1992 to less than 1% today. So we see growth in the marketplace. And as I said earlier, we have to comply with regulation. We have to interpret it strictly, and we have to balance the ecosystem. Utmost care is ensuring privacy and security of our users as we serve these markets.
And I'm glad you mentioned privacy, because I would be remiss if I didn't deal with this issue, because it is. And I think generally speaking, outside of the political issues and the biases with all of this, and this is for essentially all four of our witnesses, I think one of our bigger concerns when we talk about and value and that data having value and privacy, which is where people really get concerned with how the digital age is moving forward. News reports that law enforcement has made increasing use of what are called geofence warrants. And these geofence warrants allow authorities to compel technology companies to just records for any device in a certain area at a particular time. Court filings suggest that Google received a 1,500% increase in geofence from 2017 to 2018, and a 500% increase from 2018 to 2019. And so the Fourth Amendment requires probable cause and specificity, and that's not what these are. These warrants are essentially for any person in an area at a particular time. Geofence warrants require. So unless accompanied by particularized information and identifying a subject, geo warrants are essentially general warrants. I believe that the location should be considered as contents of the Electronic Communications Act under the Stored Communications Act. Do you agree?
Happy to understand more. This is why we issue transparency reports, because we think it's an important area for Congress to have oversight. And we recently made a change by which we automatically delete location activity after a certain period of time by default for our users. So we are happy to engage with your office, Congressman.
Because these are going on in Virginia and New York, I think, right now. But I mean, this equates for everything. I think people would be terrified to know that law enforcement could grab general warrants and get everything anywhere. So it requires Congress to act, and it requires everybody that is a witness in this hearing to be willing to work too, because it is the single most important issue, I think.
Time when the gentleman has unanimous consent request.
I do. I have unanimous consent request for Wall Street Journal article, police request for Google users' location-based news scrutiny.
Without objection.
And then I have two letters. The letters are from Congressman Walden, Congresswoman McMorris Rogers. The first Cook of Apple. The second letter is to Mr. Pichai.
Without objection, both may be entered into the record. I now recognize the gentlelady from Washington, Ms. Fairbaugh.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for with us. Mr. Bezos, in July 2019, your employee, Nate Sutton, told me under oath in this committee that Amazon does not, quote, use specific seller data when creating its own private brand product. So let me ask you, Mr. Bezos, does Amazon ever access and use third-party sellers when making business decisions? And just a yes or no will suffice, sir.
I thank you for the question. I know it's an important topic, and thank you for representing us. I can't answer that question yes or no. What I can tell you is we have a policy against using seller-specific to aid our private label business, but I can't guarantee you that that policy has never been violated.
Mr. Bezos, you're probably aware the 2020 report in the Wall Street Journal revealed that your company does access data on third-party sellers, both by reviewing data on popular individual sellers and by creating tiny product categories that allow your company to categorically access detailed seller information in a supposedly accurate. Do you deny that?
Not down. No, this her.
I'm familiar with the Wall Street Journal article that you're talking about. We continue to look into that. I'm not yet satisfied that we've gotten to the bottom of it, and we're going to keep looking at it.
Okay.
It's not as easy to do as you would think, because some of the sources in the article are anonymous, but we can.
I'll take that as you're not denying that, you're looking into it. I will tell you, a former Amazon employee in third-party sales and recruitment told this committee, quote, "There's a rule, but there's forcing or spot checking. They just say, don't help yourself to the data. It's a candy shop. Everyone can have access to anything they want." Do category managers have access to non-public data about third-party products and businesses?
Here's what I can tell you. We do have certain safeguards in place. We train people on the policy, and we expect people to follow that policy the same way we would any other. It's a voluntary policy as far as I.
There's no actual enforcement. There's no actual enforcement of that policy. So it's voluntary and there's no enforcement. So maybe that answers my.
Sorry, no, I think I may have misspoke. I'm trying to say that the fact that we have such a policy is all. I think no other retailer even has such a policy.
Well,
our
that's
enforcement of that policy. We would treat that like any internal policy, and if we found that, we would take action against them.
Well, there's numerous reports, and the committee has conducted interviews with former employees who confirm that there are employees who have access to that data and are using it. And so my next question was going to be, if you thought you were actually enforcing these rules, do you think? And again, I would just say that there's credible reporting that's documented breaches of these rules that you have put into place, and the committee employees that typically say that these breaches typically occur. Let's talk about aggregate data for a minute. Your rules do allow for you to access combined product when there are only one or two sellers in the marketplace, correct?
Yes, aggregate data is allowed under our policies. That is correct.
And interviews with former employees have made it clear that that aggregate data essentially allows access to highly detailed data in those product categories. There's a Fortem, a small business that had no direct competitors except for Amazon warehouse deals, a resale clearance account that only sold units. An Amazon employee accessed a detailed sales report on Fortem's product with information on how much the company spent on advertising per unit and ship each trunk. And then Amazon launched its own competing products in October 2019. That's a major loophole. And I go back to the general counsel of this committee very clearly that there was no access to this data, that Amazon does not use that data for its own benefit. And I'm now hearing you say, well, you're sure that that's going on. And the issue that we're concerned with here is very simple. You have access to data that far exceeds the sellers on your platform with whom you compete. You can track consumer habits, interests, even what consumers clicked on but then didn't buy. You have access to the entirety of pricing and inventory information, past, present, and future. and you dictate the participation of third-party sellers on your platform. So you can set the rules for your competitors, but not actually follow those same rules for yourself. Do you think that's fair to the mom and pop third-party businesses who are trying to sell on your platform?
I appreciate that question. I like it a lot because I really want a chance to address that. I'm very proud of what we've done for third-party sellers on this platform. We started our third-party platform 20 years ago, and we had 0 sellers.
It's expiring. And the question I wanted to ask you is that you have access to data that your competitors do not have. So you third-party sellers onto your platform, but if you're continuously monitoring the data to make sure that they're never going to get big enough that they can compete with you, that is actually that the committee has. And, you know, I think your company started in my district. I want to thank you for that. I want to thank you for the work that you've done and say that the whole goal of this committee is to, I think your company started in my district. I want to thank you for that. I want to thank you for the work that you've done and say that the whole goal of this committee is to make sure that there are more Amazons, that there are more Apples, that there are more companies that get to innovate and small businesses get to essentially a monopoly. Thank you, Mr. Trey. Yield back.
Time of the general lady has expired. I just wanted to remind the witnesses we appreciate the gratitude for the questions and your description of them as, but we'll just assume that they're good questions and you're happy to answer them so we can make sure we're making good use of your time. And with that, I recognize the gentleman from Florida.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Pichai, I'd like to start with you, and I'm just going to illustrate my question with a factual incident that actually occurred to me. Several months ago, my wife called and said, hey, there's a good article on the Gateway Pundit that you should read. So out of curiosity, I was in Washington. Out of curiosity, I Googled Gateway Pundit. And it didn't show up on the first page, didn't show up on the second page. There was a bunch of different blogs, how there were disagreements with what was on the Gateway Pundit. But I actually had to type in gatewaypundit.com to get to it. Interestingly, Google didn't get to the actual website. That was a couple of months ago, before this hearing was set to be heard, before this hearing was noticed, before you knew that you would be appearing today, and that this is an issue that obviously conservatives and Republicans have had. Last week, after this was noticed, this hearing was noticed, I did the exact in the Capitol. Wouldn't you know it? I Googled Gateway Pundit, and that was the very first website that came up. Now, this isn't from a constituent in my district. This is from somebody telling me this isn't a news report. I actually physically did this on my laptop here in the Capitol several months ago and then today. So clearly, something had between not being notified that you were going to be appearing before our committee, and then last week knowing that you would be appearing before our committee, and suddenly conservative websites are when we search for them. So was there anything done at Google between a couple of months ago and last week or the week before you appeared today, changed your approach to silencing conservative websites?
Don't think
Congressman, we approach our work with a deep sense of it without in a nonpartisan way. We want to serve all our users, no matter where they are. In fact, it's in a long-term business incentive to do so. I believe on our platforms, including YouTube, there are more conservative voices than ever before, and we believe in freedom of expression. On the specific, I will have to look into it. I obviously wasn't aware of it. We do. It could be a number of reasons. We constantly get.
If you're going to look into it for me, can I expect a response from you, say in the next 2 weeks, as to why that occurred?
We'll do our best to follow up, and I'll engage with your office to.
We'll follow up on that. I've got a similar question. So I've been in elected politics almost 10 years. And when I was in the Florida Senate and the state Senate, I never had a problem with my campaign emails being marked as spam or going to junk or anything along those lines. And we had 30, 40, 50,000 people on our email list. And suddenly I get elected to Congress, and I'm now up here in Washington, and my parents who have a Gmail account are getting my campaign emails. My supporters, just last week, one of my supporters called me and said, hey, I just want you to, my Gmail account suddenly is taking your campaign emails that I've received for almost 10 years and suddenly they're going to spam and junk folders. This appears happening to conservative Republicans. I don't see anything in the news or anything in the press or other members on the other side of the aisle talking about their campaign emails getting thrown in Gmail. So my question is why is this only happening to Republicans? I can have my supporters testify that they've received 9 years, and suddenly this last year, all of their Gmail, my campaign emails in their Gmail are going to their spam folder. So if you could view clarification on that, I would appreciate it.
In Gmail, we are focused on what users want, and users have indicated they want to organize their personal emails they receive from friends and family separately. And so all we have done is we have a tabbed organization, and the primary tab has emails from friends and family, and the secondary tab has other notifications and so on. These things.
Well, it was my father who was not receiving emails. So clearly that familial thing that you're talking about didn't apply to my emails.
Our systems probably are not able to understand that that it's your father. Obviously, we don't have that context there. We just apply it neutrally across all organizations and
well, what assurances can you give me that my time's short, one last question. What give me that any bias amongst your employees isn't influencing your spam folder algorithm?
Congressman, there's nothing in the algorithm to do with political ideology, and we do get complaints across the aisle. For example, the World Socialist Review complained in January of this year. Their site wasn't found in Google search results, and so we get complaints. We look into it, but we approach our work in a nonpartisan way, and it's in our long-term incentive to serve users across the country. And today, that's why we invest in our radars in 49 states across the U.S. so that we can capture all the.
Thank you. The gentleman's time has expired. I now recognize the gentlelady from Florida, Ms. Kennedy, for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. And let me just say, just for the record, Democrat from Florida, and I've had heard complaints about my emails going into spam as well, and I'm sure other Democratic members have had the same experience. Fortunately, Mr. Pakai, in 2007, Google purchased DoubleClick, the leading provider of certain advertising tools. Is that correct?
That's correct, Congresswoman.
When Google proposed the merger, alarm bells were raised about the access to data, specifically the ability to connect a user's personal identity with their browsing activity. Google, however, committed to Congress and to the antitrust enforcers that would not reduce user privacy. Google chief legal advisor testified before the Senate Antitrust Subcommittee that Google wouldn't be able to merge this even if it wanted to, given contractual restrictions. But in June of 2016, Google went ahead and merged the staff, effectively destroying anonymity on the internet. Mr. Pakai, you became CEO of Google in 2015. Is that?
That's right.
Okay, and this change was made in 2016. Is that correct?
That's my understanding.
For that, did you sign off on this decision to combine the sets of data with Google that Google had told Congress would be kept separate?
Congresswoman, any changes we made,
Mr. Pakai, with all due respect, please, did you sign off on or not?
I reviewed at a high level all important decisions we make. We deeply care about privacy and security of our users.
So you signed
user consent for it.
Okay, you signed off on the decision. Practically, this decision meant that your company would not combine would now come, for example, all of my data on Google, my search history, my location from Google Maps, information from my emails from Gmail, as well as my identity with the record of almost all of the websites I visited. That is absolutely staggering. According to an email from a executive, that was exactly the type of reduction in user privacy that Google's founders had previously worried would lead to a back. And I quote, "They were unwavering on the policy due to philosophical reasons, which is Larry and Sergey's fundamentally not wanting you associated with a cross-site cookie. They were also worried about a privacy storm as well as damage to Google's brand." 2007, Google's founders feared making this change because they knew it would upset their users. But in 2016, Google didn't seem to care. Mr. Pakai, isn't it true that what changed between 2007 and 2016 is they care about user privacy in 2007, it no longer had to in 2000. You agree that what changed was Google gained enormous market power.
Congressman, there's an important issue. If I could export their data, we simplify their settings. They can turn ads personalization on or off. See checkout. 1 billion users have done so.
Mr. Pakai, thank you so much. Google's bait and switch with DoubleClick is part of a Google buys up companies for purposes of surveilling Americans, and because of Google dominance, users have no choice but to surrender. Google made over 80% of its total revenue through selling of ad placement. Is that correct, Mr. Pakai?
About
80%? Yeah, okay. And because Google sells behavior ads targeted to each of us as individuals, the more user that Google collects, the more money Google can make.
In general, that's not true. For example,
more user data, not the more money Google connects. I'm sorry, please. So you're saying that the more user data, it does not mean the more money that Google can collect. Thank you so much, Mr. Pakai.
Biden in the 2020 election.
What?
Congressman, we approach the work
We gotta go
campaigns
further
today. We
than
think
November,
political ads is an important part of free speech in democratic societies,
Stop
and we
focusing on
engage
Donald
with
Trump.
campaigns to law, and we approach our work in a nonpartisan way.
It's a yes or no question. And you assure Americans today you won't tailor your features to help Joe Biden.
We support work that campaigns do. I just want to make sure I
understand that. We all have online, social media, all kinds of that outreach, that communication. This is a simple question. Can you today assure Americans you will not tailor your any way to help, specifically help one candidate over other? This what I'm concerned about is helping Joe Biden over President Trump.
We won't to politically tilt anything one way or other. It's against our core values.
But you did it in 2016. In 2016, that was widely circulated amongst the executives at your company that got public, where Ms. head of your multicultural marketing, talks about the silent donation Google made to the Clinton campaign, and you applauded her work. She pointed. Now, I'm just curious, if you did it in 16, I want to make it, in spite of the fact you did it in 16, President Trump won. I just want to make sure you're not going to do it again in 2020.
Congressman, I recall our conversation at that time, and I appreciate your concern. We didn't find any evidence of such activity, and I took the conversation to reinforce to the company. We realized even an appearance could be improper, so we clearly communicated to our employees personal political activity, while that's their right, needs to happen on their own time and resources and should avoid any use of
Of course, everyone's got their First Amendment rights to campaign. What you can't do is configure your features to help one candidate over the other. So you might have not have found any evidence, but here's what she wrote to the email. The executives in your company. Quote, we push to get out the Latino vote with our features. Second quote, we push to get out the Latino vote with our features in key states. Seems to me those last three words are the real qualifier here. That's electioneering. When you're trying to increase the Latino vote in key states, and she'd already that she was supporting Clinton, that she wanted Clinton to win. So when she talks about increasing the Latino vote, which she assumed was going to help candidate Clinton, that in key states, one thing if you're going to increase the Latino vote around the country, if you're just a good corporate citizen, you're urging people to vote. It's quite another when you're focusing on states. And you know what those key states were? Nevada and Florida, the swing states. So again, I want to make sure this isn't going to happen in 2020.
I can. We complied with laws in 2016. As a company, any work we do around elections is non-partisan. Users who come to us for understanding polling places are, where to vote, which is the date to vote, what the voting hours are. We are committed to providing that information, and I can assure you that we will approach our work.
So here's the question I think's on so many Americans' minds. They saw the list that we read here earlier on in our opening statements, all the things Google has done. Google is siding with the World Health Organization over anyone who disagrees with them, even though the World Health Organization obviously lied to America, obviously shills for China. Google's siding with them, YouTube is siding with them. We have the history of all the things and the history of what happened in 2016 in the election, where they obviously, according to one of your multicultural marketing executive, Clinton, and here we are 97 days before the election, and we want to make sure it's not going to happen again. We want to make, can you give us two assurances? One, you're not going to try to tailor your platform in a way to help Joe Biden. And second, that you're not going to use your search engine to silence conservatives. Can you give us those two assurances today?
Congressman, on our search engine, conservatives have more access to information than ever before.
And we appreciate that. That wasn't the question. Can you assure us today you're not going to conservatives? Yeah. And can you assure us today you're not going to try to configure your features as Ms. Murillo said you did for Clinton in 16? Can you assure us today you're not going to do the same thing for Joe Biden in 20?
You have my commitment. It's always been true, and we'll continue to conduct ourselves in a neutral way.
Appreciate it.
The chair now recognizes the gentlelady from Pennsylvania, Ms. Scanlon.
Thank you, gentlemen. I'd like to redirect your attention to antitrust law rather than conspiracy theories. Mr. Bezos, our investigation.
Mr. Chairman, we have the email. There is no free.
It's not your time.
Directly controls time.
Put your mask on. Put your mask on.
Mr. Raskin,
Mr. Jordan,
talk about
Ms. Scanlon.
Why would the Deputy Secretary of Treasury unmask Michael Flynn's name, Mr. Raskin? And what I want to know is, when someone comes after my motives, I get a chance to.
The gentlelady is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Bezos, our investigation uncovered documents that show that Amazon's played fairly, crossing the line from robust competition to predatory pricing to destroy rivals rather than outcompete them. And let's take Quidsi, which used to own diapers.com and provided online baby care products. In 2009, your team viewed diapers.com as Amazon's largest and fastest growing online competitor for diapers. One of Amazon's top executives said that diapers.com keeps the pressure pricing on us, and strong competition from diapers.com meant that Amazon was having to work harder and harder so that customers didn't pick diapers.com over Amazon. We're talking about hardworking families, single parents with babies and young children. Now, because diapers.com was so successful, it was a threat. The documents that we've obtained show that Amazon employees began strategizing about ways to weaken this company. And in 2020, Amazon hatched a plot to go after diapers.com and take it out. In an email that I reviewed, and we've got these up on the slides, one of your top executives proposed a, quote, aggressive plan to win, end quote, against diapers.com, a plan that sought to undercut their business by temporarily slashing Amazon prices. We saw one of your profit and loss statements, and it appears that in 1 month alone, Amazon was willing to bleed over $200 million in diaper profit losses. Mr. Bezos, how much money was Amazon ultimately willing to lose on this campaign to undermine diapers.com?
Thank you for the question. I don't know the direct answer to your question. This is going back in time, I think maybe 10 or 11 years or so, maybe the dates on those documents. But what I can tell you is that the idea of using diapers and products like that to attract new customers with new families is a very traditional idea.
Well, let's delve into this a little further. I'm sorry, I only have a few minutes here. Press on.
Your own documents make clear that the price war against diapers.com worked, and within a few months it was struggling, and so then Amazon, after buying your leading competitor here, Amazon cut promotions like Amazon.mom and the steep discounts it used to lure customers from diapers.com, and then increased the prices of diapers for new moms and dads. Mr. Bezos, did you personally sign off on the plan to raise prices? Amazon limited its competition?
I don't remember that at all. What I remember is that we matched competitors. I believe we followed diapers.com. And this is 11 years ago, so you're asking a lot of my memory. But I believe we followed diapers.com. I can also tell you after we bought diapers.com.
Okay. Just
more than
moving
$300
on.
million
Moving
was
my
trying to
time,
make it
Sarah.
successful.
I'm sorry. So you said that Amazon focuses excessively on customers. So how would customers, especially single moms, new families, how would they benefit when the prices were driven up by the fact that you eliminated your main competitor?
Well, I don't agree, with great respect, I don't agree with the premise. At the same time, you should recognize in context, diapers is a very low product category sold in many, many places, not just
Right,
at
but
Amazon.
this was the online diaper market. Now, we do
sold
have
at
evidence that
drugstores
these
and
predatory,
Costco
sorry,
and
Mr. Bezos,
Walmart
I need
and
to
so on.
push on here.
Of course,
The evidence we've collected suggests that the predatory practices weren't unique here. In 2018, it was reported that you
Blink
instructed
ray on
Amazon
Bezos
employees
is
to
nuts.
approach discussions with certain business partners, and I quote, the way a cheetah would pursue a sickly gazelle. Is the Gazelle project still in place, and does Amazon pursue similar predatory campaigns in other parts of its business?
I comment on that because I don't remember it. What I can tell you is that we are very, very focused on the customer as you started, and
With the
bargaining very
customers
hard
as
with
well,
vendors and
especially
suppliers
the
to get the lowest
families in my
prices so that we
district.
can offer
I'm
those to
sorry,
customers.
Mr. Bezos, so I'm almost out of time. I'm concerned too, because especially the pandemic, one of the biggest needs I'm seeing at the food drives and the giveaways that we're having to run in my district is that families, and we have to collect them to give them out. So it certainly is something that has a really hard impact on families, and I'm really concerned that might have been driven up here by this tactic, and I yield back.
Emily yields back. I just announced that votes have been called, but we're going to continue with the hearing, so I invite colleagues to vote. It's a rolling vote, so vote according to your own schedule. I now recognize the gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Neguse, for 5 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank the witnesses today for your testimony. Mr. Zuckerberg, in 2004, when you had launched Facebook, it's fair to say, I think you'd agree with me, that competitors. Do you agree with that?
Congressman, yes.
MySpace, Friendster, Google's Orkut, Mixi, Cyworld, 60, AOL's, Babo, they were all competitors?
Congressman, those were some of the competitors at the time, and it's only gotten a lot more competitive since.
About that, because by 2012, Mr. Zuckerberg, none of those companies that I just identified existed. You're certainly aware of that. They were all basically gone. In my view, I think was in a monopoly by then. I wonder whether you would agree with that. I take it you don't.
Congressman, that's correct. There's a lot of competitors in every part of what we do, from connecting with friends privately to connecting with people, connecting with all your friends at once, connecting with all kinds of user-generated content.
Catch on, move on.
I would bet that you or most people here have apps for each of those on your phones.
Mr. Zuckerberg, why don't we dig into this a bit further? So you and I clearly disagree about that. In 2012, I'm looking at a document that was in response to the subcommittee's investigation. It's a presentation prepared for Sheryl Sandberg to deliver to the board of directors of a major telecommunications firm, boasting that, quote, Facebook is now 95% of all social media in the United States. The title of the slide is even, quote, the industry consolidates as it matures. So I look at that graph, certainly most folks would concede that Facebook was a monopoly as early as 2012. But nonetheless, I understand that we disagree on. Would you agree with me that Facebook strategy since that time
to essentially protect what I describe as a monopoly, but obviously what you would market power, that Facebook has been engaged in purchasing competition, in some cases replicating competition, and in some cases eliminating the competition. That be
Congressman, the space of people connecting with other people is a very large space, and I there were different approaches that we took to addressing different parts of that space.
Interesting.
It's all in service of building the best service.
I appreciate that, Mr. Zuckerberg. I appreciate the latter point. It sounds like you are conceding that at least some of those strategies were what I identified, and so I want to talk a little bit about that. In 2000, email, it's from Facebook's current chief financial officer describing the company's acquisition strategy as, quote, a land grab, and saying that we're going to spend 5 to 10% of our every couple of years to shore up our position. And my sense of the facts is that is in fact what has occurred. Facebook, as you conceded, Instagram was a competitor of Facebook's. You acquired Instagram in 2012. Instagram is now the 6th largest social media platform in the world. Is that right?
Congressman, I'm not sure what rank it is, but it's certainly grown beyond our
I can represent to you that the statistics demonstrate that empirical data shows it's the 6th. In 2014, Facebook bought WhatsApp. Is that correct?
Congressman, yes, WhatsApp was also very complementary. They competed with us in the space of mobile messaging, which is a growing space and is again one part of the global.
So yes, move on.
Understood. And at that time, WhatsApp had over 400 million monthly users, a clear path towards 1 billion monthly active users, and now the second largest social media platform in the world with 2 billion users worldwide, more than Facebook Messenger, of course, your company owns. Facebook also tried to buy other competitive startups. In fact, as Chairman Nadler noted, you did tell one of Facebook's senior engineers in 2012 that you can, quote, just buy any competitive startup, but it'll be a while before we can buy Google. You recall writing that email?
No.
Congressman, I don't, but it sounds like a joke.
Well, I don't take it as a joke. As I review the email, it was in regards to having just closed the Instagram response from this individual, this engineer, to you was, quote, well played. Your response was, thanks. One reason people underestimate the importance of watching Google is that we can likely always just buy any competitive startups, but it'll be a while before we can buy Google. And given the purchases that Facebook did to this and the attempted purchases, my understanding is that Facebook made several overtures to Snapchat, for example, which rebuffed those efforts, clearly demonstrates, in my view, that email. But here's why I ask these questions, Mr. Zuckerberg. It strikes me that over the course of the last several years, Facebook has used its market power to purchase or replicate the competition. And Facebook Messenger, WhatsApp, Instagram are the most now downloaded apps of the last
Hangout,
owns
Studio.
And we have a word for that. That word is monopoly. With that, I will yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, gentlemen. I now recognize the gentlelady from Georgia, Ms. McPath.
Mr. Chairman. Mr. Bezos, you referred to third-party sellers today as Amazon's partners and that your success depends on their success. Past year, we've heard a completely different story. As part of this investigation, we've interviewed many small businesses, and they use the word bullying, fear, and panic to describe their relationship with Amazon. I'm going to share the story of a small business owner, a wife, and a mother. You can understand how this is actually affecting the lives of everyone.
On Amazon.com, and we worked day and night very hard towards growing our business and maintaining a 5-star feedback. Most importantly, this business feeds a total of 14 people, which includes 3 children and one 90-year-old granny. And as we grew, shrinking Amazon's market share in the textbooks category. So now in retaliation, Amazon started restricting us from selling. They started with in early 2019, and within 6 months, Amazon systematically blocked us from selling the full textbook category. We a single book from the past 10 months, or probably more. We were never given a reason. Amazon didn't even provide us with a notice. We were being restricted. There was no warning. There was no plan.
So, Mr. Bezos, after Amazon delisted the small business without any reason or notice, she told us that they sent more than 500 separate communications to Amazon, including to you, Mr. Bezos, last year. There was not a single meaningful response. Do you think this is an acceptable way to treat someone that you described as both a and a customer?
No, Congresswoman, and I appreciate you showing me that anecdote, and I would like to talk to her. It all to me seemed like the right way to treat her, and I was surprised by that. And it's not the systematic approach. I assure you, I don't even understand what's going on in that anecdote, because we would love for third-party sellers to sell books on the website. So I don't know. But I would like to understand it better, and with your permission, I would like to get in touch with your office.
I think, though, that you're missing the point. This is not just about one business. That this is a pattern of behavior, and basically this pattern of behavior has to change. Mr. Bezos, my question is simply going to make sure going forward that, the numerous sellers that we've talked to, they have problems just like this. Who told us that they've exhausted all of their options before finally reaching out to you directly as a last resort, but they're still waiting for your response. What do you have to say to the small businesses who are talking to Congress because you simply won't listen to them?
Well, I'd say that's not acceptable. We aren't listening to you. I'm not happy about that at all. But I would, if you allow me to disagree a little bit with a piece of this, I do not think that's systematically what's going on. And that I would suggest would be useful for you to consider in that regard is that third-party sellers in aggregate are doing extremely well on Amazon. 20 years ago it was 0, and today it's 60% of sales. Third-party sellers are growing even faster than first-party retail.
Mr. Bezos, thank you so much. You said that sellers have many other attractive options to reach customers, but that's not at all what we found in our investigation. According to a source Amazon cited in submissions to this committee, Amazon has nearly 7 times the market share of its closest e-commerce competitor. That, and I quote, Amazon continues to be the only show in town. No matter how angry sellers get, they have nowhere else to go. So are you saying that they aren't being truthful when they say that Amazon is the only game in town?
Yeah, Congresswoman, with great respect, I agree with that. I believe that there are a lot of options, and some of them are not even listed on that chart. I just looked at it briefly, but I didn't see some that I know of, for example. So I think there are a lot of things.
Okay, thank you. All right, thank you for that. My time is short. If Amazon didn't have monopoly power over these sellers, do you think they stay in a relationship that's characterized by bullying, fear, and panic?
With all respect, Congresswoman, I not accept the premise of your question. That is not how we operate the business. Okay. And in fact, we work very hard to provide fantastic tools for sellers, and that's why.
Thank you for that. Mr. Bezos, I'm going to close with giving the bookseller the opportunity to finally be heard by you.
We increased our sales on Amazon by 5 times in the past 3 years. And we have contributed that much seller fees to Amazon. We have contributed that much to your business, to 5 times. We followed all the rules by you. We please, just help us in earning a livelihood. We beg you. There are 14 likes. Please help us get back on track.
Conclude our first round with myself for 5 minutes. Mr. Bezos, according to your testimony, the marketplace is competitive, but Amazon controls as much as 75% of all online sales. An eMarketer, a source you cited to us in submissions to this committee, reports that Amazon has nearly 7 times the market share of its closest competitor. Small businesses have no real option but to rely on Amazon to connect with customers and make online sales?
No respect. I do have a different opinion on that. I believe there are a lot of options for small sellers. I believe Amazon is a great one, and we've worked very hard. I think we're one.
Well,
We
Mr.
have
Bezos,
a lot of different programs that help sellers, but we
Thank
are
you.
not the only option.
there are 2.2 million active sellers as of yesterday. About 37% of those sellers use Amazon as the sole source of income. That is over 800,000 people relying on Amazon to feed their families, put their kids through school, and keep a roof over their heads. Mr. Bezos, you have referred to third-party sellers as both your partners and customers. Isn't it true that Amazon refers to third-party sellers as internal competitors?
I think it wouldn't surprise me. In some ways, we are competing, and they're also competing with each other.
Well, that's right. Your
The
own
marketplace
documents,
does allow that.
Mr. own documents that you produce refer to the very same sellers that you've described as Amazon partners as internal competitors. In fact, we've heard from third again and again during the course of the investigation that Amazon is the only game in town. One small business owner we interviewed described it this way, and I quote, "We're a choice but to sell through Amazon." Another said, and I quote, "They've never been a great partner, but you have to work with them." During this investigation, we have heard so many heartbreaking businesses who sunk significant time and resources into building a business and selling on Amazon, only to have Amazon poach their best-selling items and drive them. So I want to talk to you about one company that really stood out from the rest. I want you to pay close attention to how they describe your partnership, Mr. Bezos. We heard from a company that makes and sells what they call useful apparel for people who work on their feet and with their hands, like construction workers and firefighters. This particular business started selling a unique item that had never been a top seller for the brand. They were making about $60,000 a year on just this one item. One day they woke up and found that Amazon had started listing the exact same product, causing their sales to go to zero overnight. Amazon had undercut their price, saying a manufacturer would generally allow it to be sold, so that even if they wanted to, they couldn't match the price. Here's how the apparel company described working with Amazon. Amazon strings you along for a while because it feels so good to get that paycheck every week. And in the past, for lack of a better term, we called it Amazon heroin, because you just kept going and you had to get your next fix, your next check. But at the end of the day, you find out that this person who was seemingly benefiting you, making you feel good, only going to be your downfall, end quote. Mr. Bezos, this is one of your partners. Why on earth would they compare your company to a drug?
Sir, I have great respect for you in this committee, but I completely disagree with that characterization. What we have done is create in the store a place. If you go back in time, we sold only our own inventory. It was a very controversial decision inside the company to invite third-party sellers to come. It's really our most valuable retail real estate, our product detail pages. We did that because we were convinced that it would be better for the consumer. It would be better for the
Mr.
customer.
Bezos,
Selection. And I think we were right.
Yeah.
And I think it's worked out well.
Reclaiming my time, Mr. Bezos. This is one of many small companies in this year-long investigation that they were mistreated, abused, and tossed aside by Amazon. Now, Mr. Bezos, you said that Amazon is only focused on doing what's best for the customer. You just said it, and that and also third-party sellers. How is that possible when you compete directly with third-party sellers with your own products that undercut the competition? Apparent conflict of interest for Amazon to produce and sell products on its platform and compete directly with third-party sellers, particularly when you, Amazon, sets the.
Yeah. Thank you. No, I don't believe it is. We have the consumer making the decisions. They're making the decisions about what to buy, what price to buy it at, who to buy it from, and
That's not the question, Mr. Bezos. The question. Apparent conflict of interest because you are a data company. You know when customers put something in their cart, when they take it out. Traditional brick and mortar stores like a grocery store where competition don't have that. And so I just want to follow up finally on an answer to the question that you gave to Congressman Jayapal. You said that you can't guarantee the policy of not sharing third-party sellers' data with Amazon's online hasn't been violated. You couldn't be certain. Can you please explain that to me? can you list examples of where that policy has been violated? Because it's particularly concerning to me, Mr. Bezos, that shouldn't third parties know for sure that data is your own line, their competitors? Why should a third party seller list their product on Amazon if they're just going to be undercut by Amazon own product as a result of data you?
Sir, I think what I want you to understand, and I think it's important to understand, is that we see against using individual seller data to compete with our private label products.
You couldn't assure Ms. Jagpal that that policy isn't violated.
Well, we are investigating that, and I do not want to sit here, and I do not want to go beyond what I know right now. As a result of that Wall Street Journal article, we are looking at that very carefully, and we want to get those facts, and we'll share them with you.
Thank you, and we look forward to it. The evidence shows that Amazon is only interested in exploiting its monopoly power over the e-commerce marketplace to further expand and protect this power. This investigation makes Amazon's dual role as a platform operator and competing seller on that platform is fundamentally anti-competitive, and Congress must take action. And with that, I recognize the ranking member of the subcommittee, Mr. Sensenbrenner, for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, I think that the history proves that Congress does a poor job in picking winners. And I've looked over a lot of the material that has been assembled. I've been working with the chairman for over a year on this bipartisan issue. And I have reached the conclusion that we do not need to change our antitrust laws. They have been working just fine. Here is the question of enforcement of those antitrust laws. Now, we've heard a lot about the Facebook act of Instagram. That happened in 2012. Obama's FTC signed off on that. So, regardless of what you think has happened at that time, the fact is that this acquisition did smell test of the regulators involved.
Yeah.
Maybe they made a mistake, or maybe something else happened. I don't know. But the fact is, there is not a problem with the law. Now, back about 35 years ago, AT&T was broken up. It was determined that one-stop shops were monopolistic. And AT&T, because you have to get your long distance from your local phone company, that was monopolistic. So the baby bills were spun off. A whole lot has happened since mergers and acquisitions in the telecom industry. Technology advanced a huge amount. And guess what? We're back to exactly where we were in 1984. So this goes to show that congressional pressure is not the best. Now, using the AT&T example, which is a big flop and counterproductive, let me ask Mr. Bezos, say the AT&T example was applied to Amazon, and you were required to spin stuff off. So you might have no more of a one-stop shop, but you have to go to separate places for groceries or videos or electronics. How are the consumers helped by that?
Sir, thank you. They would not. Very clear.
Now, Mr. Pichai, let me ask about Google. If you were forced to split up your business, say spin off ad tech and YouTube, can you describe what happens to consumers there?
It's not about the makers.
Congressman, today, in most of the areas we are dealing with, they see prices free or falling, and they get more choice than ever before. So I think it serves them well.
And you're right.
So,
I'm not going to be on this committee in the next Congress. I am going to put my feet up and become a senior, quote unquote, statesman. But, let me say that we have heard a whole lot of complaints about big tech. Some of them are political in nature, and I share the complaints and the concern of Mr. George and others. And others talk about anti-competitive activity. it seems to me that it's not for Congress that legislates all of our antitrust laws and the precedent that has been established through litigation over the last 100+ years. But we ought to go back to the regulators, to the enforcers, have them look at this stuff, and have them make a determination on whether the law's been violated. I think the law's good on that, and we don't need to throw it all in the wastebasket. But there are areas of concern that we have heard from both sides of the aisle that I think need to be addressed. And if it requires an agency like the FTC, that they've made mistakes in the past, so be it. We're all human, we all make mistakes, and even government agencies do that. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. I now recognize the gentlelady from Washington, Ms. Diapol.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Zuckerberg, in March of 2020, suggested by email to your management team that moving faster and copying other apps could, quote, prevent our competitors from getting footholds. Sheryl Sandberg responded, it is better to do more and move faster, especially if that means you don't have competitors build products that take some of our users. Facebook's product management said that, quote, I would love to be far more aggressive and nimble in copying competitors. Has Facebook ever taken steps to prevent competitors from getting foothold in competitors?
Congresswoman, I view it as our job to understand what people are finding valuable services that they use.
Be your competitors?
Congresswoman, we've adapted features that others have left, as have others copied and adapted.
2012, after that email conversation, how many competitors did Facebook end up copying?
Congresswoman, Congresswoman, I don't know.
Less than 15. Your team was making a plan. How did it play out?
Congresswoman, I'm not sure I agree with the premise here. Are we sure that we build the best services for people to connect with all the people they care about? And a lot of that is done by innovating and by building new things internally.
Thank you, Mr. Zuckerberg. Let me go on. Has Facebook ever threatened to clone the products of another company while also attempting to acquire that company?
Congresswoman, not that I recall.
And I'd like to just remind you that you are under oath, and there are quotes from Facebook's own documents. Prior to acquiring Instagram, Facebook began developing a similar product called Facebook Camera, correct?
Congresswoman, that's correct. Building mobile cameras with Instagram. That's what they did at the time. Their set was companies like what we were building with Facebook Camera and ViscoCam and Please.
Thank you, Mr. Zuckerberg. Did you ever use a similar Facebook Camera product to threaten Instagram's founder, Kevin Systrom?
Congresswoman, I'm not sure what you would mean by threat.
You that Mr. Systrom, that Facebook was, quote, developing our own photo strategy. So how we engage now will also determine how much we're partners versus competitors. Down that he feared you would go into quote mode if he didn't sell Instagram to you. So let's just recap. Facebook cloned a popular product, approached the company you identified as a competitor, told them that if they didn't let you buy them up, there would be consequences. Were there any other companies that you used the same tactic with while attempting to buy them?
Congresswoman, I want to respectfully disagree with the characterization. I think it was clear that this was a space that we were going to compare.
He has collected from others. Warren Evans Spiegel, the founder of Snapchat, that Facebook was in the process of cloning the features of his company while also attempting to buy Snapchat.
I don't remember those specific conversations, but that was also an area where it was very clear that we were going to be building something. People want to be able to communicate, they want to be able to communicate with all their friends at once. And we're going to make sure that we build the best products in all of the spaces that we can around helping people stay connected with the people they care about.
I appreciate that, Mr. Zuckerberg. I think the question again here is, when the dominant platform threatens this potential that should not be a normal business practice. Facebook is a case study, in my opinion, in monopoly power because your company harvests and monetizes data, and then your company uses that data to spy on competitors and to copy, acquire, and kill rivals. You've used Facebook's power to threaten competitors and to ensure that you always get your way. These tactics reinforce Facebook's dominance, which you then use in increasingly destructive ways. So Facebook's model makes it impossible for new companies to flourish separately, and that harms our democracy. It harms mom and pop business, harms consumers. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentlewoman yields back. The gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Buck, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Mr. Bezos, thank you for being here today. I'm concerned that you've used Amazon's dominant market position to unfairly harm competition. We've heard Amazon uses proprietary data from third-party companies to launch its own private label products, meets with startups to discuss investing in the product, and proprietary data from these meetings to create its own private label products, allows the sale of counterfeit items through its web platform. During this hearing in Boulder this January, PopSocket's CEO and inventor David Barnett detailed how Amazon allowed counterfeit products to appear on Amazon's market ahead of PopSocket's products. Mr. Barnett told CNBC that PopSockets found at least 1,000 counterfeit products for sale on Amazon Marketplace, which Amazon allegedly failed to remedy until PopSockets agreed to a nearly $2 million marketing deal with Amazon. Also seen troubling reports in the Wall Street Journal detailing Amazon's use of third-party sellers' proprietary data to develop and market its own competitive private label. The Wall Street Journal also reported last week that Amazon's venture capital fund used meetings with unsuspecting startup companies to gain access to secret proprietary information and financial details. Amazon then reportedly used that information to launch competing products, often disastrous results for the original startup. There are many examples of this behavior, but one allegation in the journal's reporting sticks out in particular. In 2011, Amazon contacted Vocalife LLC's possibility of investing in the speech detection technology. Vocalife's founder accepted the meeting, thinking this was the company's big break. After displaying Vocalife's microphone technology and providing proprietary information, including engineering data, to Amazon employees, the relationship abrupt halt. Amazon employees allegedly stopped responding to emails before the technology eventually found its way into the Amazon's Echo device. Allegations are serious, especially because the size and scope of these practices couldn't happen without Amazon's monopolistic control of the marketplace. So concerned that given Amazon's allowance of counterfeit goods on its marketplace, especially counterfeit goods from China, that Amazon's marketplace may be knowingly furthering China's use of forced and slave labor conditions. This is especially important following recent reports that at least 80 global companies that's on the Amazon marketplace, including Nike, Starbucks, and Samsung, have ties to Chinese factories that use enslaved Uyghur Muslims. Following the reports, Senator Hawley introduced an important bill last week requiring American businesses to certify that their supply chain does not rely on force. I do not expect you to have intimate knowledge of legislation. I do want to ask all four of our witnesses yes or no question. Will you certify here today that your company does not use and will never use slave labor to manufacture your products to be sold on your platform that are manufactured using slave labor? Mr. Cook, you were kind enough to visit with me on the phone. I think we briefly discussed this. If you can give a yes or no answer, and I understand you haven't read the details of the bill, but would you agree to this idea?
I'd love to engage on the legislation with you, Congressman, but let me be clear, forced labor is abhorrent, and we would not tolerate it. And so I would love to get with your office and engage on the legislation.
Thank you. Mr. Pichai.
Congressman, concern in this area, I find it abhorrent as well. Happy to engage with your office and discuss this further.
So I really don't want to even engage with my office. You guys agree that slave labor is not something that you will tolerate in manufacturing your products or in products that are sold on your.
I agree, Congressman.
And Mr. Cook?
We wouldn't tolerate it. We would terminate a supplier relationship if found.
Mr. Zuckerberg?
I agree. We wouldn't tolerate this, and if we found anything like this, we would also terminate any.
And Mr. Bezos?
Yes, I agree completely.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. And now I yield back.
Thank you, gentlemen. And now the gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Raskin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank Mr. Buck for that excellent line of questioning and for the upcoming legislation. I look forward to joining that. We want, in the 19th century, we had the robber barons. In the 21st century, we got the cyber barons. And we want the extraordinary power and wealth that you've been able to amass is not used against the interests of democracy and human rights around and not against the interests of a free market at home. So, Mr. Bezos, let me turn to you. I'm interested that you play as a gatekeeper. A lot of consumers want to know when the HBO Max app will be available on your face, and I understand that negotiations are ongoing, but that your company is not only asking for financial terms, but also for from Warner Media. Is that right, and is that a fair way to proceed? In other words, is it fair to use your gatekeeper status role in the device market to promote your position as a competitor in the video streaming market with respect to content?
I'm not familiar with the details of those negotiations. As you said, they're underway right now. I predict that the companies will eventually come to an agreement. And I think this is kind of two large companies negotiated agreement. It's kind of normal case of
right.
commerce.
But here's why I pursue it precisely because it is a large company. They stand in for hundreds of thousands of much smaller companies who are even in a more disadvantageous position with respect to negotiating. The general proposition then you can speak to if you don't know the details of this, which is it okay to negotiate not just for financial terms and be part of your fire unit, but also to try to in that negotiation leverage with respect to getting content from them?
Well, again, I'm not familiar with the details. What
I'm not asking about that in general.
In general, I think that when two companies are negotiating, you are negotiating not just the amount of money that's going to change hands, but also what you're going to get in exchange. That is a very fundamental way that business works.
Do you see at least to outsiders that would look like a structural conflict of interest? You're using your control over access to people's living rooms, essentially. You're using that in order to, in terms of getting creative content that you want. And are you essentially converting power in one domain into power domain where it doesn't belong?
I think what I should do is offer to get you information. If you, I'll get it to your office for you because I'm not enough with this, and I could imagine that there would be scenarios if we're just talking in the abstract where it would be inappropriate, and I could imagine scenarios where it would be very normal and very appropriate.
Fair enough. I want to talk about in emerging markets, smart homes, and I want to start with the hub of the smart home, smart speakers. Amazon priced the Echo device below cost.
Not its list price, but it's often on promotion, and sometimes when it's on, it'd be below cost. Yes.
Well, several other companies did tell us, in fact, that Amazon is pricing Echo devices way below cost, making it nearly impossible for them to aggressively discounting Alexa-enabled speakers as a strategy to own the smart home. Like many markets we've heard about today, speakers with voice assistants like Alexa, along with the myriad of smart home appliances that Alexa can interact with, make up the next ecosystem or platform for lock-in customers. Would you say the smart home market for which the Echo Ring security system and other smart devices operate is a winners take all market? Yes or no?
No, I wouldn't, especially if we're able to succeed at what we want, which is we would like our vision for this is smart home speakers should answer to different wake words. So
when considering acquisition of
case by case basis, and it just so I think it's important if we could achieve that. Then I think you would get really good behavior on the part of competitive voice data.
When you were looking at acquiring Ring, you wrote to your executive team, quote, "We're buying market position, not technology, and that market position and momentum is very valuable." So if smart homes are not a market with lock-in effects, why would a leading market position and momentum be so very valuable?
Market position is valuable in almost any business, and it's one of the primary things that one would look at in an acquisition. There are multiple reasons that we might buy. If we're trying to buy some technology or some IP, sometimes it's a talent acquisition, but the most common case is market position, that the company has traction. They built a service, maybe they were the first mover. There could be any number of reasons why they have that market position, but that's a very common reason to acquire a company.
Well, when it becomes dominant in a market, it can favor its own products and services. Alexa-enabled smart speakers make up over 60% of the smart speaker market. Because when I ask Alexa to play my favorite song, Prime Music is the default music player. Is that right?
I think that's true if you're a Prime member, yes.
And a New York Times report found that when users say, "Alexa, buy batteries," Alexa responds, "Would you like to buy AA Amazon basic batteries?" Has Alexa ever been trained to favor Amazon products when users shop by voice?
The time of the gentleman has expired, but the witness may answer the question.
I hope it's been trained in that way. I'm sure there are cases where we do promote our own products. There's of course a common practice in business, and so it wouldn't surprise me sometimes does promote our own products.
Thank you.
The chair recognizes the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Gates, in 5 minutes.
Mr. Bachai, during our prior discussion earlier, said that Google doesn't work with the Chinese military. That answer was deceptive because Google works with many of the entities that work with the Chinese military in common. And just as one example would be Tsinghua University, where Jeff Dean, who is the head of Google AI, served on the computer advisory committee for the university, and then the university takes nearly $15 million from China's Central Military Commission. So you can see how even if you really show up at the offices of the Chinese military, if you're all showing up at the same place, working together on AI, that would lead to my concern. But I want to talk about search. That's an area where I know Google has real market dominance. On December 11th, you testified to the Judiciary Committee, and in response to a question from my colleague Zoaf about search, you said, "We don't manually intervene on any particular search result, but leaked memos obtained by the Daily Caller isn't true. In fact, those memos were altered December 3rd, just a week before your testimony, and they describe a deceptive news blacklist and a process for developing that blacklist approved by Ben Gomes, who leads search with your company, and also something called a fringe ranking." To beg the question, who gets to decide what's fringe? And in your answer, you said to Ms. Lofgren that there is manual intervention of search. That was your testimony, and now I'm going to cite specifically from this memo from the Daily Caller. It says, the Daily Caller obtained from your company, it says, "The beginning of the workflow starts when a website is placed on a watch list." It continues, "This watch list is maintained and stored by ARIS with access restricted to policy and enforcement specialists." So it does beg the question who these enforcement specialists are. "Access to the can also be shared on a need-to-know basis to enforce or enrich the policy violations. The investigation of the watch list is done by Athena, the ARIS manual review tool." So you said to Congresswoman Lofgren that there was no manual review tool. Documents indicate that there is a manual review tool. So help us understand the inconsistency.
Congressman, there are two parts to this. in general, we algorithmically approach our search results. We have robust policies to do so, and we tested both with user feedback and use raters to validate. We ran over 300,000 experiments and launched around 3,000 improvements to search. And we don't manually tune. Last time was in the context of, is there someone behind the curtain manually tuning an individual search result? We don't. We generally approach it algorithmically. We, however, in order to comply with the law in every country we operate in, for example, there may be an actor or a website identified as in elections, and we then have to put that site on a list so that that doesn't appear in our search results against queries. So other violent extremism.
And is that done manually, Mr. Pichai? That process you described, is that done manually?
And we could get reports from agencies. We are complying with, or it's a known DMCA-based.
There is either a manual component or there is not a manual component. Which is it?
For creating those lists, that process can involve manual portion.
Okay, great. Well, that is sort of the concern that I have. Now said something different today than you said to Ms. Lofgren, because you've confessed that there is a manual component to the way in which you blacklist, and it seems to be no coincidence that it's sites like Gateway Pundit, The Western Journal, American Spectator, Daily Call, Breitbart that receive the ire or the negative treatment as a consequence of your manual tooling. And it also seems noteworthy that your own company have spoken out. You said that one of the reasons you maintain this manual tool is to stop election interference. I believe it is in fact your company that is in election interference. And it's not just my view. Mike Wacker came out and was a whistleblower indicating that the manual list targets that Google specifically goes after are those who support President Trump, who hold a conservative viewpoint, and he left your company in 2019 because he was speaking out against these outraged mobs. So can you see how when you empower individuals, some of the same individuals that Project is exposed as labeling people as terrorists who say make America great again or who support the president, that in fact can be the very election interference concerned about, and that you're using your market dominance in search to accomplish that election interference?
Google did not do
Congressman, with respect, I strongly disagree with that characterization. This work with any political viewpoint. We do that to comply with law, known copyright violations, very narrow circumstances, and we have to do that with the law. And in many cases, those requests can come from law enforcement agencies.
Your own employees are saying you're doing it for a different reason. Your own employees are saying it's for political bias. Are you? No, I'm sorry. May I be recognized for unanimous consent?
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, just given the productivity of our discussion, I request that we be permitted a third round of questions.
I now recognize the chairman of the full committee, Mr. Nadler.
Yeah. So the documents prove that the music and journalism industry in this country are an economic freefall. Over 200 in America no longer have a local newspaper, and tens of thousands of journalists have been laid off in recent years. The reason journalism is in freefall is that Facebook now capture the vast majority of digital ad revenue. Although news publishers produce valuable content, it is Google and Facebook that increasingly profit. Publishers have told us that Google and Facebook maintain their dominance in these markets in part through anti-competitive conduct, as well as competitors. Mr. Zuckerberg, in 2015, Facebook reported high and quickly growing rates of video viewership on its platform. Based on these metrics, news publishers fired hundreds of journalists, choosing instead to boost their video division. In 2018, it was discovered that inflated these metrics and had known about the inaccuracies several years before Facebook publicly disclosed this. Mr. Zuckerberg, did you know that these were inflated before they were publicly released?
Congressman, no, I did not, and we regret that mistake and have a number of other measures since then to make sure that we
And do you realize the harm that this caused journalists across the country?
Congressman, I certainly know how important it is that the metrics that we report are accurate, and we've put in place additional measures to make sure that we can audit better.
I have to say to the journalists who lost their jobs because of Facebook's deception.
Well, Congressman, I disagree with that and also your description of
reclaiming my time. Google, meanwhile, maintained its dominance in part through aggregating its products and services. Mr. Pichai, I understand that Google collects user data on users' browsing activity through its Chrome browser. Does Google use that data for its own purposes, either in advertising or to develop and refine its algorithms?
Mr. Chairman, we use data to improve our products and services for our users. Anytime we do it, we believe in giving users choice, control, and transparency. We make it very give them simplified settings to choose how they like their data.
And so you do use the data that you get from company for your purposes.
My understanding was whether we use data in general to improve our products and services, and to show ads, but we give users the choice. They can turn ads personalization on or off.
Now this obviously, this data from all these companies gives you a tremendous advantage over them and over any competitor. Does the ability to make money in any way affect Google in terms of what news appears in a typical user's search results?
The way we rank our search results, we don't take into commercial relationship that we have.
Okay. But Facebook and Google have greatly in the United States. Reporters have been fired, local newspapers have been shut down, and now we hear that Google and Facebook are making money over what news they let the American people see. This is a very dangerous situation. And unfortunately, my time is back.
Thank you, gentleman, for yielding. I now recognize the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Stubbe, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm just going to pick up where I left Mr. Pichai. There are rioting groups that are going unchecked with the posting of what I would contend is very violent video, yet yesterday a YouTube video about doctors discussing hydrochloroquine and discussing the dangers of children returning to school. Clicked on the link, it was taken down, and then I was sent a different link on YouTube, and it was taken down. I just checked again just to make sure, and it says that this video has been removed for violence community guidelines. How can doctors giving their opinion on a drug that they think is effective for the treatment of COVID-19 and doctors it's appropriate for children to return back to school violate YouTube's community guidelines when all of these videos of violence is all posted on?
Congressman, we believe in freedom of expression, and there is a lot of debate on YouTube about effective ways to deal with COVID, robust debate. But in the area during the pandemic, we look to local health authorities. So, for example, in the US, it would be CDC, for guidelines around medical misinformation in a narrow way, which could cause harm in the real world. And so, for example, if there is a video, and if it explicitly states something could be a proven cure, and that doesn't meet CDC guidelines, we would.
Expression of speech, and you have these doctors who are giving their opinion as doctors, and I don't understand why YouTube and therefore Google thinks it's appropriate physicians and their opinion of what can help and cure people with COVID-19. I'm going to switch quickly to Mr. Zuckerberg. I think at this point it's fairly obvious technology platforms have been stifling conservative news and opinions. You employ a panel of content moderators. Can you explain how Facebook chooses who these moderators?
Thanks, Congressman. We do hire a lot of people around the world to work on security. Our team is more than 30 or 35,000 people working on that now. We certainly try to do this in a way is neutral to all viewpoints. We want to be a platform for all ideas. I don't think you build a social product with the goal of giving people. You don't believe that people being able to express a wide variety of things is ultimately valuable for the world. And we try to make sure that our policies and our operations can carry that out.
Is there an ideological diversity amongst the content moderators?
Congressman, I don't think we hear them on the basis of an ideology. They're hired all over the world. There's certainly a bunch in the U.S. There's diversity in where they're hired, but certainly we don't want to have any bias in what we do, and if we discovered that.
So you don't specifically hire, say, conservative moderators and Democrat or liberal moderators so that there's a balance in your
Congressman, in terms of the 30 to 35,000 people or more at this point who are doing safety and security review, that is correct. In terms of the people setting the policies, I think it is valuable to have people with a diversity of viewpoints involved so we can make sure that we have the different viewpoints represented in the policy development process. And we also consult with a number of outside groups whenever we develop new policies to make sure that we're taking all perspectives.
What are some of those outside groups that would be conservative leaning?
Congressman, I need to get back to you with specific groups, but it would depend on what the topic is.
Can you just think of one? I mean, you said you reach out to outside groups. One conservative outside group that you reach out to and use as a content moderator?
Congressman, I'm talking about stakeholders and groups that are inputs to our policy development process. And I'm not involved in those conversations directly, so I would have to get back to specifics on that, but I'm quite confident that we speak with people across the ideological spectrum when we're developing our policies.
I would very to follow up on that. Real quickly, can you briefly explain the approval process for third-party fact checkers and how many fact checkers does Facebook employ?
Yes, thanks. We work with about 70 fact-checking partners around the world, and the goal of the program is to limit the distribution of viral hoaxes, so things that are clearly false, from getting a lot of distribution, but we don't ourselves want to be in the business of determining what is true. That feels like an inappropriate role for us to play. We rely on an organization called the Pointer Institute, and I think it's called the Independent Fact-Checking Organization that has a set of guidelines of what makes an independent fact-checker. We certify those fact-checkers, and then any organization that gets certification from that group is qualified to be a fact-checking partner.
Thank you. The gentleman's time has expired. We're going to I'm going to recognize Mr. Johnson for 5 minutes, and then we're going to take a short break. Mr. Johnson, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Bezos, Amazon has a problem with counterfeit products being sold on its platform. Counterfeit products not only rip off the owners of legitimate businesses, they also dangerous. Counterfeit medicine, baby food, automobile tires, and other products can kill. Amazon has said it's fixing its counterfeit problem, but counterfeiting seems to be getting worse, not better. Amazon is $1 trillion, but Amazon customers are not guaranteed that the products purchased on your platform are authentic. Amazon acts like it's not responsible for counterfeits being sold by third-party sellers on its platform. And we've heard that Amazon puts the burden and cost on brand owners to Amazon's site, even though Amazon makes money when a counterfeit good is sold on its site. More than half of Amazon's sales platform.
But go to flea markets.
I think this is an important issue and one that we work very hard on.
It cut off. Hang it cut off. Let's see. Oh, look, Google did it. Pictures. What? All right. Come here.
Those are not sold on its platform, and why isn't Amazon responsible for all counterfeit
Let's see if it breaks
platform?
This is an incredibly important scourge. They are a problem that is not, it does not help us earn trust with customers. It's bad for honest third-party sellers. We do a lot to prevent counterfeiting. We have a team of 1,000 people that does this. We invest hundreds of millions of dollars in systems that do this. We have something called Project Zero, which helps brands serialize individual products, which really helps with counterfeiting. We have
I'm glad that you have those
as well.
I'm glad that you have those features in. Why isn't Amazon responsible for keeping all counterfeit products off of its platform?
We certainly to do so, Congressman, and we do so not just for our own retail products, but for third-party products as well. We do work closely with brands.
We heard from numerous third-party sellers and brand owners that Amazon has used knockoffs as leverage to pressure sellers to do what Amazon wants. For example, the founder of Pop Sockets testified in January that Amazon itself was selling knockoffs of its product. After reporting the problem, it was only after his company committed to spending $2 million on advertisements that Amazon have stopped diverting sales to these knockoffs. What is your explanation for that business practice?
That's unacceptable. If those are the facts, and that if someone somewhere inside Amazon said, buy X dollars in ads and then we'll problem, that is unacceptable, and I will look into that and we'll get back to your office with that. What I can tell you is that we have a counterfeit crimes unit, attempt to prosecute counterfeiters. I would encourage this body to pass stricter penalties for counterfeiters and to increase law resources to go after counterfeiters.
But your company does make money off of counterfeit goods being sold on your platform, isn't that correct?
In my view, sir, it would only be in the short term. We don't make. I would much rather lose a sale than lose a customer.
All right,
we make money because the customer comes back.
Making companies pay extra to avoid having their products disappear in rankings seems to be so unfair, especially to businesses. The American dream is threatened when that happens. Don't you think so?
Sir, I'm not exactly sure what you're referring to. What we were just talking about a second ago, I agree completely.
I'm talking about a totally different situation now, where a company on your platform, but is not paying anything extra, gets buried in the rankings, and but pay extra are able to get their products pushed up, and they avoid getting pushed down. Is that an acceptable?
Sir, I think what you're referring to is the fact that we offer an advertising service basically for third-party sellers, promotion to their products. That's a voluntary program. Some sellers use it, some don't, and it's been very effective at helping people promote their products.
With that, I yield back. Thank you.
Gentlemen, yields back. The committee will stand in a brief recess.
Four of the wealthiest and most powerful people in the world facing Congress.
Fantastic ending. I spilled the rest of the bottle all over my legs, and now I am an ink blot. Ending live stream. That was 3.5 hours of inking it up.